evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 125 of the Retro Spectives Podcast, Mailbag 6. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, James Turlings. James, it is such a delight to be back on the show and recording again. It has been a little while, as I'm sure some of our audience is well aware of.
What? We released the last episode like 2 weeks ago. It's fine.
Now, unfortunately, it was closer to 2 to 3 months. Apologies to everyone for the delay. But we are back on track and we're eager to get the show up and running again. We figured the best place to reboot and restart would be with a mailbag episode. We do these every year and we didn't want to break the tradition of taking a break from playing regular games and instead just talking about them. So massive thank you to everyone for your patience. Massive thank you to everyone in our Discord community for the awesome questions. I'm really looking forward to talking about old games and new for the next couple of hours.
These are always my favorite episodes because I don't have to prepare anything other than, a couple of answers the night before. But they were good questions this time around. Like, I think they get better every year as there's, more interest in asking more esoteric questions, I guess. I think those are always the most fun to answer.
It's funny you say that, James, but in a way I do more preparation for this than I do for the regular episodes.
Well, yeah, you were telling me you've got pages and pages of answers.
Yeah, well, I want to give proper answers, so I it's probably like 5 to 6 pages worth, but that's okay. I mean, we're known for not dicking around, so do you want to get stuck into this?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question comes to us from Mayday Mima, someone who has asked us many questions over the years, and very grateful for all of them. He has asked the all-important question: have you guys seen all of the Wallace and Gromits?
And of course we have. I think for those who are unaware, Australia obviously has two big cultural influences. We have the UK and the United States of America. And although during World War II we kind of started transitioning to being more influenced by the United States, when it comes to things like ABC, our government broadcasting agency, we were still very much British aligned during James's and Isles' childhood. Like, I grew up watching Postman Pat and Thomas the Tank Engine, these very intrinsically UK shows, and Wallace and Gromit goes right along with those. So I've seen them all multiple times, and by multiple, probably 5+ times each.
And I assume you're only talking about the original three, not all these new ones that have come out.
I thought there was one new one, which was the
the
werewolf
one.
Yeah, are there more apart from that?
I'm pretty sure there are more now, yeah. So maybe not then.
I've seen the original 3, and then I saw the Were-Rabbit one at the movies, and I thought that one was excellent as well. But my favorite one was always the heist one, the one with the penguin that was a rooster.
The Wrong Trousers?
The Wrong Trousers, yeah. That was always my favorite one.
Yeah, I myself was actually born in the UK, so
okay.
My family had these all on VHS.
Yeah, me too.
So I watched all of them as a kid dozens of times. I personally think they each got better with every entry. I'm a sucker for, when animated things have these really complex contraptions in them, and the way Wallace gets out of bed always, mesmerized me as a child. Chicken Run is also great, by the way.
Yeah, Wallace and Gromit they're stone cold classics. Like, they're creative, they're funny, they're well paced, they're good for the whole family, and I think that they've aged extremely well. So yeah, Wallace and Gromit is 10 out of 10 movies, media, love them to pieces. And the Were-Rabbit one is also absolutely fantastic, despite coming out many years later after the first 3. So yeah, love them to pieces. So our next question also from Mayday Mima, and he asks, are there any franchises you don't care for, but there's one game you really like? So he's asking us if there's like a franchise that we don't like. It might be Mario or whatever, but there's one specific Mario game that we think is excellent. I do have an answer for this, James, but I'll let you go first.
Alrighty, so I thought long and hard about this one. I'm sure there is another answer to this, but this one kept coming back into my mind. So my answer for this question is Tales from the Borderlands. I have tried many times to play the first couple of games in this series, but it really just doesn't click with me. The humor is very grating. The gameplay is kind of whatever. I just never really cared for the actual gameplay, even though I thought it would be something I like. But Tales, the Telltale, version of the game, is one of the best stories in video games that I have experienced, full stop. I love every single character inside it, and I am absolutely furious, like steaming from the ears mad about how all of them got shafted in 3. The writing team in that game fumbled the ball so bad it retroactively ruined one of my favorite games for me. So, yeah, that's my answer for that one.
Interesting. Good answer. I haven't played Tales from the Borderlands, but I enjoyed the first couple of Borderlands games quite a bit. When Borderlands first came out, it was one of those first games to kind of integrate FPS and RPG things together. There were very few options. You had Fallout 3, and Borderlands was like, it's a first-person Diablo game, which at the time was completely revolutionary.
Pretty crazy.
No one else was really doing that at the time. Over time, I am less into it now that, games like The Division and Destiny, they all kind of take that model, and you end up with, very, very tanky enemies, and it's just another Diablo clone in first person. But at the time, I loved them. My answer is funny because it kind of touches on similar ideas. It's actually really difficult to find an answer to this question because the nature of franchises is that there's usually a lot of games, and what that means is it's hard to find a franchise where you hate all the games except one. I think the closest for me is Diablo 1.
That was actually also one of my answers too.
Yeah, and it's not that I hated Diablo 2 or anything. It's just that Diablo 1 is such a different kind of experience from the later Diablo games, with its low emphasis on RPG skill trees and everything. It's a very simplistic game, but I found it very immersive and tactile because of that.
It's slow and methodical. Things like positioning actually matter, like using doors as choke points. The exploration feels kind of natural.
The lighting is such a big part. You can barely see the things on the edges of your screen.
It's so oppressive.
Yeah,
it's awesome. Love it. The jingle of gold dropping to the ground never gets old.
Or skeletons collapsing into bones. That crinkling noise.
The vibe of like the town every time you come up for fresh air, it's just great. I love that setup of there's this town filled with characters that you get to know and you just go deeper and deeper down this, ever descending hole. It's just, there's something really cozy about it. I love it.
So yeah, Diablo 1 stands out to me as a game that after Diablo 2 and the later games, it kind of transformed into something completely different. For some people that was a good thing, but for me, I just don't get along with those kinds of looter based models anymore. Whereas Diablo 1, produces an experience closer to Dark Souls, and that's the only good game. So
it's true. All right. So next question comes from Hexady, and I've actually answered this question to him on our Discord this year, but I'll reiterate my answer later. So, in or out of the show, what is the most, in quotes, important game to you that you've played this year? Whether it made you think about games in a new way or it was interesting to you mechanically or story-wise?
So I've got two answers for this one. So one is probably the most important game. The other is my favorite game that's come out this year. I think the most important game, particularly when you're talking about the show, is easily Final Fantasy VII. And the reason for that is, as is well documented, I don't really get along with JRPGs. And while I don't think Final Fantasy VII is flawless, I do think that the good parts of the game are extremely good. And there were parts of the game where I was absolutely loving Final Fantasy VII. I thought there were parts of this game that were excellent. And that shows to me that there is a version of a JRPG out there, hypothetically, that I can enjoy from start to finish. So Final Fantasy VII was mind-opening to me, not just because I thought it was good in parts, because I thought it was excellent in parts. And it shows that there's hope for me yet.
Oh, interesting. I wouldn't have picked that for you, but it makes sense on reflection. My answer is a game that I have been slogging through for months now. Probably the hardest tactics game I've ever played is an SRPG called Reverse Collapse Codename Bakery. This is it's got a fucking awful name. Even the characters joke about how terrible it is in game, but This game is ball-crushingly hard. Every single mission is like handcrafted and balanced on a razor to the point where, it skirts this line of almost being a puzzle game with how hard it is, right? I say at this point in my 80 hours, I basically make a save every single turn. And I genuinely, takes me quite a while to do one mission, like a few hours. And, if I did it from start to finish in one go, it would take like 15 minutes. But God, the game, one thing that it does extremely well is that it will have like a kind of gimmick in each mission that is mechanically deep and interesting rather than just being like throwaway or, something that you're happy to see the back of. And then they will let you explore this mechanic, and then when you get like halfway through the level, when you're finally settling into a rhythm, you feel like you figured everything out, they will throw curveball after curveball at you. They will never, ever let you get to this stage where you are like doing things out of routine or, just idling by. It makes you consider every single fucking turn on its own. It reminds me a lot of when we did Gorky 17, because in a lot of SRPGs, maybe like your Fire Emblems or your Advanced Wars, you generally control, 10 to 20 units who all basically just attack and move every turn. This game, you have two characters who have, at the beginning of the game, they have 10 action points, and then as you go, that expands to like 20. And they have an absolute arsenal of futuristic tech gadgets that they can summon on command. And it's about exploiting all of these items in order to gain advantage. And every single unit that you get to control feels very different from each other, despite having access to theoretically the same set of gear. It's awesome. There's kill everything missions. There's like half the game is stealth missions where you can't actually attack. You have to like watch patrol patterns. There's missions where there's like 6 sets of overlapping guards walking back and forth, and then suddenly these huge spotlights turn on as well. Suddenly this guy walks out of the break room to take a leak, and you're just like sent for a loop. It's just great start to finish, and the story's awesome too. So if you want to play something really fucking hard, cannot recommend Reverse Collapse enough.
It kind of sounds like it's turn-based, so it's not the same. But are you familiar with like the Shadow Tactics series or Desperados?
I know of them. I haven't played them myself.
Yeah, those are real time, but you have 3 or 4 distinct characters in terms of role on a massive map that you have to kind of move through stealthily. But it's not that kind of like razor wire thin line thing you're talking about, but it feels like it's kind of similar in scope. Sounds like an interesting game. Although maybe are you playing on the hardest difficulty to get that kind of challenge?
So I am, and I'm not only playing on the hardest difficulty, but every mission has bonus objectives that you need to complete to S-rank those missions, and I've S-ranked every single mission up until this point. Often takes me multiple hours to get through one mission, so it's a slow burn, but it's quite satisfying to like see progress.
It looks really interesting. So the other game I had for this is my favorite game I've played this year, and that is Celico. I think I was talking to you about this earlier, James. It's a
oh yep. Actually had that on my I had my eyes on that one too separately, actually.
Yeah, so Celico is a first-person shooter. It's made in the Doom engine, and a way to think about it is that it's like old school Fear, in that it's got a lot of the old, it's got that kind of like retro chunky pixel look to it. But it is the game that it's most similar to is Fear, which are the kind of like tactical office shooters that came out from 2004 to 2008. It is absolutely superb. It in my mind is just basically takes everything about Fear and improves upon it in every possible way. Most importantly, it gets rid of the slow motion from Fear. It makes
Interestingly, I think a lot of people will raise their eyebrows as you say that. I think a lot of people value those games for that reason.
Okay, so just real quick, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but the reason the slow motion is bad in Fear is that it confers too large of an advantage, and that without it, the game is absurdly difficult on the higher difficulty levels. That's because Fear is a hit scan shooter, and enemy reaction times are extremely fast. So they will start shooting you the moment you poke your head out of cover. So you kind of the whole idea is that you use the slow motion to basically give you a free window to get some headshots off on enemies. But that slow motion's too powerful. But without it, you just are forced to take damage in every single encounter until you run out of health. What Celico does is that it gives the enemies a little bit more of a reaction time so that you can actually poke your head out of cover and shoot them, as well as utilize, different grenade options and flanking maneuvers and all kinds of different things. So it hits the right balance in terms of that, but it also gives you a way larger arsenal. The weapons are a lot more fun to use and powerful. The enemies are more aggressive. They more actively try to flank you. It's just a fantastic game. I played through it all relatively quickly and I loved it. So Celico is, in my mind, one of the best FPS games ever made. I would put it equal in quality to Dusk. And I think that if you enjoy FPS games, you should absolutely play it. One of the things that distinguishes it from a lot of other, I guess, retro-inspired shooters is that most retro-inspired shooters tend to be more inspired by games like Doom and Quake. These kind of ones where you circle, strafe, and have insane maneuverability. It's almost like arena shooter-esque. Celico is a lot more defensively orientated. You can play it more aggressively on the lower difficulty levels, but I'd say that it's far more about anticipating flanks or tactically being aggressive than it is about spinning around in circles. If you leave cover willy-nilly in this game, you will die because the amount of incoming damage you take is really high. But the game gives you enough tools to kind of play defensively with coordinated or intended aggression at points, which is very rare in this kind of shooter.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never really liked the genre until we did Blood, maybe last year or the year before. Even when we did like Doom 1, I was like, it's okay. And then this year I've been looking at stuff like that because of Blood, I think. Like Celico and Ultra Kill are the two at the top of my maybe playlist.
Ultra Kill is also a masterpiece, by the way. That game is absolutely fantastic. But that's a game which kind of takes what Doom Eternal does or what Quake does and kind of pushes that formula to its natural conclusion and does so brilliantly. But they are still arena shooters, and the whole game is designed in terms of moving from one arena to the next. And it's the best at what it does. Ultra Kill is a fantastic game, but Celico is, I guess, a completely different kind of experience, and it is also the best version of what it is doing. So you should check out both. They're both really good.
It's interesting. Hearing you talk about Fear reminds me of our review of Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, where it has this one gimmick in Splinter Cell's case, like that zapper that turns electronics off, that is completely overpowered and trivializes the whole game, but I also think is one of the reasons lots of people like it. It's interesting. Like, we are super in the minority there.
Yeah, well, when Fear was in development, it was a very different game to what it ended up being. The idea was it was more of a squad shooter, and each member of your squad would have different powers, with yours being slow motion. But it ended up just being a slow motion FPS fest. So probably the best way to play Fear today is to play on a slightly lower difficulty and just not use slow-mo. But even that is still a pretty straightforward game. The level design in Fear is also, you know how Fear has a reputation for having incredible AI?
Yes.
Yeah, and for sure it has good AI, but one of the concessions to that is that the level design is very obviously boxy.
It's corridors.
Boxy and corridory, yeah. Celico has far more interesting level design with better AI. So I don't know. To me, Fear has been eclipsed. That game is now a bad version of Celico. I'm not saying, it's irrelevant. I'm just saying that one was clearly a better experience for me than the other. And I think people are still sleeping on this game. So if you like FPS games, Celico is a masterpiece and is well worth your
It's
time.
still in early access, technically, right?
So yes, it is, in the sense that only episode 1 is out and there are 2 more episodes planned. But episode 1 is, 8 to 12 hours long, and as a game, it is
worth on its own.
it's
Yeah,
it's
okay.
effectively finished. You see the progression, you get every gun, every upgrade by the end of that. So what they'll do, I'm assuming, is reset your progress for episode 2 and 3 as is normal for those kind of shooters. But it's a complete game, and it's well worth the asking price for episode 1. So
Nice. Okay, I'll have to check it out. Our next question comes from R2 Sinus, who is another long-time listener. Thank you for the question. And he asks, what, in your opinion, are great design choices across any areas, gameplay, art design, UI, etc., that you've come across in these old games that are rare or non-existent in modern games and you wish would come back to become more relevant?
So for me, I kind of have a fairly broad answer to this question. The biggest thing is that has the potential to come back is removing or modifying what we currently perceive as quality of life features. So to give you a couple of examples, one of the coolest things about playing Thief or System Shock in today's world is that there aren't objective markers. One of the coolest things about playing Rain World is how little it has in terms of tutorials or obvious tutorials, and you have to figure out stuff yourself. Even things like tank controls that exist in Resident Evil have their specific places where they have value over the more free-form analog controls that we enjoy on, most 3D games today. And the key thing about all of these things is not that I guess these lack of features or these clunky mechanics, whatever you want to call them, it's not that they're objectively better than what is done today. It's just that today, I think a lot of these things aren't even understood as choices that you can make when developing a game. They're considered obsolete. They're considered things that you can't do because of how frustrating they are for the players to deal with. How they should instead be understood is a different way of doing things that evokes a different kind of experience for the player. And I mean, that's one of the things we've kind of discovered doing this show over the years. Even though the original reason they were done this way wasn't because they were intentionally choosing to do this way over the modern way, these design choices did evoke a particular experience that is very hard to see today. So I guess for me, I just want to see modern game developers understand that these are options that they can pursue when designing their games.
I completely agree with this. I had a different answer, but I want to just touch on this briefly as well. I think that the primary cause of this trend is the increase of focus testing that modern games get. There are lots of mechanics that are good from a game design point of view that players will often push back on strongly. Tank controls. One thing that I see very often is that I think opportunity cost is one of the most important pillars of game design. The idea that a player made a decision and they have to deal with the consequences of their decisions. And so many players, when faced with choices like this, where the game actually does give them the tools to make the right choice, but they aren't at the level where they can see all that information, it makes them feel like they were locked into a choice they had no control over, and thus, rather than reflecting on their own shortcomings, are quick to blame the game and say, this game shouldn't have locked me out because I made this choice or something like that. And I think really good games need to skirt this line where, because if your choices don't matter, I find the game becomes very uninteresting. I don't care about the choices I make because they don't affect me. One of my favorite games in the last few years is a game called Potionomics, which is an economic simulator, basically, where every day you have about 6 kind of actions you can take, and you can only take those 6 actions, and you have a goal every week, which is to make the most money or the most expensive potion that you can. And you have to like plan your week in advance and make specific decisions on specific days.
It's very board
And it can
gamey
be,
in a way, actually.
yeah, and it can be very punishing. And the number one thing that I liked was that I had to make choices deliberately and efficiently and figure out the best path through the game. And the number one complaint on the reviews in Steam, etc., was players who wanted a relaxing shop management game and got this more stressful, like itty bitty, I need to make good decisions in order to beat the game. So I don't know. I think you're not going to appeal to the broadest possible audience if you make decisions like this in your game, but you do give it a much like stronger, cohesive feel. And I think you make a kind of game that will stand the test of time, even if that game has many critics, forever. I think it's more important to make something unique and solid and cohesive.
To boil it down to a single concept, I'd say it's this idea of friction. I think one of the things that a lot of modern games do is that they aim to remove or alleviate friction from the gaming experience. They want you to smoothly go through the game, enjoying it the whole time. A lot of old games instead have a lot of rough edges and are filled with friction. There's things that constantly hinder you, both in terms of enjoyment and challenge, and which make it difficult to progress through the game. That friction or difficulty is what I enjoy about video games. So by smoothing out all those rough edges and making it, I guess, more palatable and easier to get through, it kind of disengages my whole interest with the game as a product. Like playing through, I don't know, Red Dead Redemption to me is just not enjoyable, because if you're just playing through the game, you just kind of like go through it slowly at a methodical pace, easily headshotting your way through the game, and there's nothing really to stop you getting through. If there's nothing stopping me getting through, it barely feels like a video game to me in a lot of ways.
Yeah, if it doesn't push you to grow as a player, like, what's the point? Is kind of how I feel these days.
And I'm a person who likes walking simulators, which have zero friction. So it's not that kind of experience isn't valid. It's just that a lot of things which would historically be more video gamey have become less so that way, which is why the indie scene is so great, because it does capture a lot of what I like about video games classically. That modern AAA games they're not as interested in creating that kind of experience.
Players will always push back against this kind of thing. I think as a developer, you need to like really think about, if I don't cave in, will this player get over the hump on their own and then realize that they were wrong? Or like, and I don't mean wrong, I mean like, because sometimes you can feel. I remember when the Souls games first came out, and me and my friends were like, "These bosses just aren't fun." And now, when I played Dark Souls 1 last, I did the whole thing with a crossbow. It was super easy. I was wrong. I just wasn't at the level the game required me to be at back then.
Well, but the thing that's interesting is that was intended. Like those difficulty humps are designed to be difficulty humps and you are meant to die lots in your attempt to progress it. That was the intended experience,
Yeah.
You weren't meant to get through that game easily. You were meant to get frustrated. You were meant to summon if that's what you felt you needed to do to get through that game, so that you could have that triumphant feeling of overcoming the challenge. But that was all the intended part of the experience. You weren't meant to be as good as we are at the Souls games as we are today. That's kind of like an artifact of us just playing the games to death. So,
yep.
And that's what Dark Souls recaptured. It recaptured that feeling of being fucking terrible at a video game,
Yeah, and it fucking came at the perfect time. It came during the heyday of the Wii era, where everything was super accessible and easy, and it was a breath of fresh air at the time. And these things kind of are more of a pendulum, I feel like, where you see more and less of this depending on the year, but it's good when both of these things exist at the same time, I think.
And they do now. And I just, once again, I don't want to be a doomer anymore because I think that the indie scene basically goes a long way to alleviating and dealing with these problems. Like we've never had more kinds of gaming experiences than we do today. This is not like the early
Oh
2000s
yeah.
where you had very few options when it came to video games. If you have an interest, there is probably a video game out there that aligns with the kinds of things you're interested in. So I mean, it's fantastic. There are games that are very evocative of retro game design today everywhere. So it's fantastic. I don't really have much to complain about in terms of what I have access to today.
Yeah, so just quickly, my list was fixed camera angles, pre-baked lighting.
Mm,
Yeah, this trend of dynamic lighting, I just feel like it's not as artistic as pre-baked. It's also, an easy way out for people to just like turn it on in their, Unreal settings or whatever.
mm.
I think you lose a lot of artistic merit by always doing that. AAA 2D visuals, I fucking miss 2D Pokemon like nothing else.
Strong agree.
Like we got something like Cuphead, which was an indie game, but God, that game looks incredible. Can you imagine what we could put out if a bigger company took a risk like that on something? I think it would look amazing.
Just on that note, it's funny. I've been playing a lot of Pokemon ROM hacks recently, and the most popular Pokemon ROM hack format is Emerald or Fire Red, which are
Yeah,
I guess the most advanced looking true 2D graphics because that's what everyone wants from their Pokemon game. No one wants the 3D stuff at all, and it's bizarre to me that people, yeah, the
people.
insistence on 3D graphics.
I don't think that's true. I think that young people, like when I was a kid, I always had this dream about this open world Pokemon game where you could go anywhere and capture whatever you wanted. And now, as an adult, that is a reality. I can have that experience.
Yeah,
And
not
now
really.
and I kind of recognize now that that's not really what I want, actually.
I just
Uh,
think that it wasn't really done particularly well in Scarlet and Violet, and that's fine. Like it was the first true iteration of it, right? But
but there's Arceus as well, and there's Pal World now. Like, there's games like that,
just
and it just doesn't do it for
give it
me.
10 years and the Pokemon MMO will release. It's only a matter of time. Yeah. So next question is by Dave, host of Tales from the Backlog. We had him on for our Killer 7 episode, and we went on his show for the wonderful game, Deadly Premonition. Thanks again for
Best
picking
game
that
I've
one,
ever
Dave.
played.
Really appreciate
Love
it.
it.
Fantastic game. Well worth my time. His question is, what are the best and worst smelling video game levels?
I love this question. It's so funny. Okay, so I did worst first, and there was a few, I'm gonna say, categories of game that like my or game level that my mind went to. The first was kind of like sewer levels. Those smell pretty bad. But then there's like flesh mazes, like the end of System Shock 2, like where you're just trapped in a meat, or like the meat circus in Psychonauts, just truly horrific. There's like battlefields, like blood everywhere, decaying bodies. Pathologic, decay, rancidness, death. I think that would smell awful. Zombie games. Any of the levels from Bad Mojo, where you play as a cockroach in an unkempt building.
Bad
I
Mojo
think
is on my list, yeah.
I think some of the Rain World levels would smell awful. And I thought about this, and then I realized, what if we combined all of those categories into one horrific level? And upon doing that, I realized that the worst possible level would be a flesh maze filled with shit. So the answer obviously goes to Binding of Isaac.
True enough. Yeah, it's hard to top that. I kind of was only looking at episodes that we've done for the show, I guess. So for me, it was between Bad Mojo and then the other game that came to mind was Silent Hill 2. Silent
Oh,
Hill
yep.
2, I think, is very interesting in terms of its aesthetic, in that it's a very grimy and gross looking game. And I think that the kind of lower resolution graphics help for that. But there's a couple of moments like where you stick your hand through this thing in the wall, or you're like
Yeah.
you're reaching your hand into a toilet. Um,
Yep.
there's just something about the whole game, whether you're in the hospital or the apartment complex or the prison. where it feels gross and disgusting in a way that I don't think other horror games really do to the same degree. Even Resident Evil Remake or, Resident Evil 7, which have all this gross black goo everywhere, I don't think capture that same level of disgustingness that Silent Hill 2 has. So for me,
Yeah.
it was Silent Hill 2.
I had another joke, or like half joke answer to this question, and it was Roller Coaster Tycoon 2. That time I forgot to build sick rooms and went to get lunch, and came back and every pavement was just paved in vomit. Like,
Mate,
the whole park was nothing but vomit.
You just build bins. Bins is the answer.
No bins, no sick rooms, only roller coasters.
And the consequences.
For best smelling, this one was hard, but ultimately I think that it's any level that has, like, the land of chocolate kind of food aesthetic. Mario Party 1 has this level, or this board called Peach's Cake, and it's just a board game on top of a wedding cake. I think all of those levels would smell amazing.
So I went for Banjo-Kazooie. I don't know what it is, but there's something about these colorful 3D platformers that I just think are so happy and vibrant and full of life. Honeycombs everywhere, or the beach, or whatever it is. I just think they'd smell good, James. So for me, it was...
Especially that sewer level.
Well, maybe not the sewer level, but the other ones I think would smell pretty damn good. Like Click Clock Wood, or the one on the beach. I don't remember the name of these levels. It's been too long since I played that game.
Anything that's not in the hub world.
Exactly.
Yeah, a great answer.
Okay, so next question is from Super Pizza Cat, and they ask, what is the process you use to take notes and create the podcast? I'm shortening the question slightly, but we'll answer it in full. He just wants to know about the podcast creation process and what we do in terms of taking notes and bringing the show to life, essentially.
Yeah, so we of course try not to talk to each other about the game as much as possible. I think we've slipped up from doing this in recent years.
There'll be little bits that get through. It's not. It used to be it was like don't talk about it at all. Now we just try not to talk about it in a major way, because we can still have a spontaneous discussion without, with having one or two opinions slip either way.
Yeah. In terms of my note-taking, so I've basically always just done a plain text document with a few templated segments in. My standard headings these days are macro gameplay loop, level structure, presentation and tone, story writing characters, gameplay, progression systems, music and sound, miscellaneous, and oftentimes I'll just delete all of them and do something more specific to the game we're playing, because oftentimes you can't put them all in the same box, but that's just a nice, initial starting point for me. In terms of do I take notes while playing versus later, what I normally do is that I'll play the game in full without taking notes and then ruminate on the game in my head. And then literally the night before, as late as possible, I will put it all down on paper. And I find that putting it all on paper, I don't often refer to my notes when we're recording, but the act of writing them down lets me often see connections and ideas that I couldn't when it was all in my head. I really don't like taking notes as I'm playing a game, just because it feels a bit inauthentic to me. Like, that's not how I would play this game if I wasn't reviewing it, right? And I want to review it as close to the actual experience of playing the game as possible. So I just try to play the game as I normally would. And obviously, I can't, there's thought, I have thoughts and I analyze things as I'm playing subconsciously, but I don't, sit there writing pages and pages of notes for every single individual level or anything like that.
Very, very similar to me, James. I'll add that the process of taking notes ends up being counterproductive in a lot of ways, because when you first start playing a game, you might start taking notes on things which seem really significant at first, but by the 4 or 5 hour mark, those things that you took notes on that seemed important are just completely irrelevant. So you can kind of be building a false narrative for yourself by taking extensive notes early on. I agree that the best way is to play the game holistically and then do a lot of thinking about it. I also approach it in the same way. And as James said, putting things from your head onto paper is a good way to bring, I guess, a definitional understanding to the game and how it works and so on and so forth. So you and I are very similar in that way, James. We prefer to have a more holistic understanding of it and then discuss it on that basis.
I actually do have a note on that thing you just described where like your day 1 impression of the game might be dramatically different to your day 14 impression of the game. And actually, that's one of the reasons I do like writing notes, is that I can identify that has happened, because it's often not clear to me. Like when we did Killer 7, my opinion on the game was pretty mid until we finished it, and then it jumped up a little bit, just because of the things you see at the end of the game. And that can happen, but like I think it's worth talking about that, because like there's always been this mythical idea of this 80-hour game that's terrible for 70 hours, and then once you get past the 70-hour mark, it becomes the best game you've ever played.
Isn't that every MMO?
Yeah, it kind of is. Like those games with big end games, or are all like games that have like shocking plot twists like that deep into the game that recontextualizes the story up until that point. Or there's like mechanics that like maybe something like The Witness, although I'd argue that game's good from the beginning.
Well, yeah,
there's like
that's the thing. And like when I think of like Metal Gear Solid 2, for example, that's a game that has a plot twist or twists that recontextualize it, but it doesn't stop.
But it was still a good game up until that point.
It was good at the start as well, yeah.
Yeah, so there are some games maybe that I'd argue fall into that category, and the only really way to catch those out is to remember that at hour 2 you were hating your life while playing it. And it also, like, day to day, like, your mood changes. Like, if you're having a bad day and you play the game, every little bad decision the developers made, like, gets at you a little more than it normally would, right? Like, being able to identify when that's the case is important for giving a relatively unbiased review, but that's kind of not as possible as you'd like it to be, no matter what you do.
Yeah, so yeah, for me, it's better to have that holistic approach, and I think we're both mostly on the same page with that. But you raise a good point about taking some small notes as your opinion shifts as you play the game. So just there was just a bit more to this question that I want to jump into, James. So
Okay.
Pisaka also asks about like reading developer interviews and stuff. And basically,
I did that once.
Well, what I was going to say is what we generally do is not we do all that after we've written our notes or recorded the show, just because we like to keep our opinions mostly fresh in our own perspectives and our own opinions. And the problem is, if you watch a bunch of reviews and read a bunch of things, you can't help but be influenced by those other perspectives.
Yep.
You know, because a lot of the time they're very interesting, well-researched, well-thought-out perspectives. So for me, I always view those things as a special treat I get to indulge in after we've recorded the show.
Yeah, like our opinions on, like, we already mentioned this, but Splinter Cell Chaos Theory is like completely different to the general consensus, right? And we wouldn't get to like explore that idea if we watched a heap of reviews and then had our opinions influenced by the larger, gaming collective, right? And, we're just sharing opinions here at the end of the day. I think we've gotten a lot better at reviewing games and can together generally identify whether something's worth playing. But even then, like, where we've settled together as reviewers is going to be different to a lot of people's. So, but I think there's value in keeping it more our own thing rather than having our opinions blend in with everything else.
I have to say, James, one of my favorite things from reviewing on this show is when we reviewed Age of Mythology, we made a bunch of suggestions about what we wanted improved.
Oh yeah, and they made literally Retold came out and they made half of those changes.
Like most of them. Like the remake literally implemented everything we said they should change. It was unbelievable. Like they changed the things to active abilities. They changed how god powers worked. Literally exactly how we said they should change them. I was like, man, we're geniuses.
Uh, I need to play that. I haven't because it came out so close to us playing the original. I was
Yeah.
like, I don't need to play the story so soon, but I will get around to it
But
because
that
it's
was really
actually
funny. I
interesting.
was like, man, they listened to the show. That's incredible.
Yeah, sure. It's probably just obvious things.
Yeah.
So for the next question, it comes from Hugh Tamlin or Pigo. If you had to hike across a video game setting, which one would it be? Now, I went through this question in my mind was a lot harder. I think I've overcomplicated it, but I there was stages to my progression. Um, and originally, like I instantly thought of something like Death Stranding and was like,
Boring.
that's kind of like a whole game about hiking. That's kind of boring. What about something more like abstract? Like, what does it mean to hike through the world of Res or like Super Hexagon or Pac Man? Like, what does that even mean? And then it's like, okay, so the spirit of hiking, what's that about? So it's like a relaxing meditative experience out in nature, or do I want something more exciting and wild, like some alien planet or something? And then, like, I think it's more about getting away from civilization and just, being in the world. And do I want it to be like, a nostalgic trip or somber? What kind of tone do I want? And then there was like weird questions I had, like, do I get to hear the game's background music while I, hike through? Is that playing in the background everywhere? If I'm hiking through the world of FF7, do I get ambushed by monsters every 5 steps? Like, all of these things. Ultimately, I settled on Valheim, I think, because I love that game and the world. There's got a lot of interesting biomes. It has that, like, relaxing, naturey aspect,
Hopefully,
but
this is
it's
with the
like,
monsters removed, James.
no, with the monsters. I think it'd be really, pleasant and dangerous. I think that'd be fun.
This is my problem with the question. I was like, in all the games, like, there's things trying to kill me. I don't think that's a pleasant thing to hike across.
In the back of my mind, I was like, if Patrick answers Dark Souls for this question, I'm gonna fucking table flip.
No. So for me, I ended up going with Siberia. So
Oh, I thought about that one too. Good answer.
yeah, I think one of the best things about Siberia is how it manages to capture a sense of lost grandeur. Like the locations in Siberia were all clearly once bustling either with people or with a sense of industry, but when you actually play through the game, they're mostly empty and melancholic and quiet with only a few people around. And when I think about what I like about, traveling and exploring, I like going to places with a rich sense of history, not necessarily completely empty, but places that have, I don't know, that sense of quiet. Like I enjoy, like I'm not a religious person at all, but I love going to cathedrals because they have this sense of,
Oh, they're beautiful.
yeah, this sense of awe to them in terms of them being basically artistic masterpieces, architecturally, with the way the music plays, the acoustics, the paintings on the walls, the stained glass windows. And to me, Siberia as a game kind of captures that same sense of awe and majesty. Um, while also still, being in touch with nature, you still have that ambient noise throughout the game. So, yeah, Siberia, I think, is one of the best encapsulations of the kind of atmosphere that I'm looking for when exploring or hiking.
I think that's an excellent answer.
Yeah,
Although it
kind of
is
a
still
boring
just
one.
hiking through Siberia.
It's funny because playing the game Siberia is like hiking because, the gameplay is terrible. Anyway, sorry, let's move on.
Yeah, so, okay, next question comes from Buster Wallop. The next few questions, actually. Thank you very much. And he says, kind of boring, but what was your favorite game on the show this year, and what was your least favorite? So, for me, I'm actually, even though we didn't do as many episodes this year, I actually was really happy with the games we picked. In terms of like picking big, well-known games that are different to each other and interesting and worth discussing. So for me, I think the most boring was probably Crisis. Everything else was just a little more entertaining, a little more, well made, and the back half of that game was kind of shit, to be honest. In terms of my favorite game, not necessarily the best, but I'm really glad we did Zelda 1. I think there are some really interesting design decisions in that game that were made in the very cradle, the very beginning of gaming as a medium that just have not survived to today. And I think they're all super fascinating, even if a bit dated in some ways. I loved exploring the map with almost no quality of life features, having to make my own notes. It was a very kind of meditative experience in some ways.
Interesting. I mean, I think Zelda 1 is a fine pick. It's just that, yeah, for me, I ended up getting frustrated and looking at a walkthrough maybe a bit too much. I needed to have your patience, James.
Yeah, I definitely caved in the last section, but up until that point, pretty good.
So for me, the worst was definitely Killer 7, which is hugely disappointing because that game is like exactly the kind of games we should be encouraging, like incredibly creative and unique. It's just that at the end of the day, the gameplay is bad. Like the gameplay is bad. And for a lot of people, that won't be a problem because everything else about this game elevates the experience. But for me, the gameplay was just too bad for me to really enjoy it. And it went on too long. And yeah, very disappointed. I just got to be honest. It wasn't a very fun game to play through, and it was an absolute slog getting through the game from about the 3 or 4 hour mark onwards. So yeah, Killer 7, not a very good game, but for many people that won't matter in terms of their appreciation, and I understand that. The best was System Shock 2. In a way, this is barely a revelation. I love the immersive sim genre, like all of the games, Deus Ex. I even like the modern ones. I like Dishonored, the modern Deus Ex games. And this is one that I'd wanted to play for literally forever. And it mostly met my expectations. I think it was a really fun game. Not flawless. A lot of the RPG systems in it were kind of awkward, I think, in terms of some things being far better than others. You were too powerful by the midpoint in the game, but maybe that's just because I was drawn to a fairly optimal build. But the middle part of this game, where you're on these big open levels with objectives that are non-linear, were just fantastic, and it's exactly what I love. It's perfect. It's what I love about video games, and you very rarely see this kind of open-ended level design with RPG elements today. So yeah, System Shock 2 was the best game I played, which I think has more to do with me loving this particular genre rather than it being, the best game ever. So it just falls into my interest pretty much perfectly.
Well, I took this question to me the game you were happiest about playing, because I agree that System Shock 2 was the best game we played this year for sure. Although most of them were pretty good. I was actually I really was tempted to say Deadly Premonition for this one, even though we did it on Dave's show, not ours. But God, that's the one that's gonna stick with me, even though it was unarguably, out of all the games I played this year, it has the worst gameplay by far, and it's still like my favorite somehow.
I think that the game I guess I would have expected to occupy this spot on the list was Resident Evil 2, which I think was a good game, but I was expecting so much more because I know this is a lot of people's favorite, and I thought it would be continuing the more survival aspects, but instead it was kind of like a step along the way to a more action-orientated Resident Evil. And I think it's a far worse experience than the remake of Resi 2, which I wasn't expecting. And I thought it would be closer to the, after playing both, I still don't understand why the Resi 2 remake is more of a survival horror game than the original, which is like the opposite direction that I would expect them to go with the remake.
Yeah, I should play that eventually.
It's very good. It's the closest game I've played to Resi 1 remake, which maybe isn't that shocking, but
yeah, in terms of the years they came out in, I would kind of expect that. Yeah, I was a bit I don't know about disappointed.
It's still good, right? Like, I don't want to say like the game sucked or anything. I still enjoyed it.
I was whelmed.
Yeah, it's more that I was like, why do I have so much ammo? Why can I kill everything easily?
Because we've gotten better. I was like, I was hoping for, the same experience we had the first time around. We're never going to get that, but yeah,
No,
just
we're too good as gamers now.
too jaded, too good at too good. That's not true in the slightest.
Well, James, I reckon it is time for a music break. And I'm going to be extremely greedy and take the first music break. I'm going to be even greedier because I'm going to subject everyone to a piece of music that's not even from a video game.
But
I know, right? Well, it's the Mailbag episode, so I can do whatever I want, and there's no one who can stop me. So the piece of music I have selected is from a film called Annihilation, also a book, but it's basically eldritch horror. And the piece of music I've selected is from when the human encounters an alien at the end of the film, close to the end of the film. And when I watched this scene, I found it incredibly compelling. I think it is a really, really good scene. The movie isn't perfect by any stretch. I think that it's like a 7 out of 10. But this ending sequence is absolutely phenomenal, and I think that the music that plays is a huge part of that experience. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight this piece of music. I love eldritch horror, and I think this is one of the best depictions, particularly on film, of a human encountering an alien life form. It's wonderful, very very visually impressive in a way that I think most films struggle with this concept a lot. So here is the music from the Annihilation alien encounter scene.
alrighty, so that was a track off the Annihilation OST. Back to questions. Here is another from Buster Wallop. It is, what do you think are the 3 best overall games of the show thus far? And I think this is a great question because asking for top 3 means that both of us aren't just going to say Resident Evil 1 and be done with it. So this question is really, what is game 2 and 3? Because I assume we've both put Remake as 1.
Correct.
For me, I personally decided that I was not going to name any of the modern games that we did, because otherwise
that's cheating.
game 2 and 3 would be Celeste plus something else.
Pathologic 2,
Yeah, so for me, my answers are, for number 2, Katamari Damacy, which is, I actually think, I don't think I've ever met a single person who didn't like this game. I would be shocked if anybody who hates this game is a soulless monster of a person who doesn't deserve to have opinions. And I only say that half ironically, but it's just really good fun. It doesn't outstay its welcome. The music's incredible.
And it escalates perfectly, right?
The escalation, the progression is perfect. It's just wonderful, just incredible experience. My next question, Patrick kind of already mentioned it, but Pathologic one for me. I know that the gameplay
Wow.
wasn't great. It's kind of soul crushing. I've mentioned this before, but out of all the games we've done on the show, this one's narrative has stuck with me forever.
Mm.
For gameplay, I actually had a really hard choice for something other than this. I actually really liked Symphony of the Night, although I think the latter half is kind of the reason I didn't include it.
The inverted
And
castle is
then,
poo.
yeah, if I was, truly making my top three, Pathologic probably gets kicked out by Psychonauts here.
Mm.
That game also's gameplay was a bit mid, but the sense of humor and just vibe of the game is something I really connect with. Um, and then behind that, closely, something like Mushihime Sama, which is probably the only game from the entire show that I still play regularly.
So yes, Resident Evil Remake was my number one as well. My number two was Typing of the Dead. Uh,
Oh,
I
wow.
I think that game is absolutely brilliant, and while I think that its dynamic difficulty is absolutely bullshit, the fact that you have infinite lives means that it's really not that big a deal. And it kind of has this interesting thing where your number of lives basically increases the more you play. So you can get through that game even though it's pretty impossible to do so on the earlier attempts.
I like that both of our number twos could be sort of like they're like meme games, right? Like they're not serious in the slightest.
Yeah,
They're
I
just
don't
like
know. I feel like
pure,
that's
simple fun
well. The
with
other
no
thing is
wasted
that
space.
Typing of the Dead definitely has that thing where its story and voice acting are so bad that they are actually legitimately good. Like it really
Yeah.
does clearly break through the wall. It's not simply campy, it is horrific. It's horrifically entertaining. So, and I love typing games, and Typing of the Dead just absolutely nails that feeling. Like it's so satisfying and tactile to play through it. So, um, my final game slash games are kind of a bit more boring, but these are definitely the experiences I enjoyed the most in terms of them being big, chunky gameplay experiences. And that is either Thief 2 or Metal Gear Solid 2. Um, I
Cool.
love stealth games, and I think these are two of the best stealth games I've ever played. Thief 2 is probably better from a pure gameplay perspective, but Metal Gear Solid 2 also has a really good story that is very engaging. And yeah, I guess with Metal Gear Solid 2, I was surprised at just how much I enjoyed it. Thief 2, I knew I was
Mm.
going to love, but after playing Metal Gear Solid 1, I was very down on Metal Gear. I was like, what the fuck? Why do people like this so much? I don't understand. But Metal Gear Solid 2 had substantial, excellent gameplay, and yeah, I absolutely loved it. So my
A really like thought provoking kind of story. Like it doesn't nail it perfectly, but it makes you it makes you think about interesting things, right?
absolutely, yeah. And I remember one of our Discord listeners had a bunch of interesting stuff to say afterwards. My favorite concept he came up with is that the Patriots are God, and that a lot of what's happening in this game is actually more akin to the plot lines that occur in JRPGs. And I was like, you know what? That shit makes a lot of sense. I can see if we view the Patriots as a stand-in for God, that a lot of the philosophical ruminations still hold true. I
Mm.
thought that was very cool. Took my thoughts down very interesting paths. So yeah, Metal Gear Solid 2 had a really fantastic blend of story and gameplay, unlike Metal Gear Solid 1, which I actually think is pretty heavily carried by its story.
How high would you rate something like Star Fox 64? Because I remember you really liked that a lot more than you were expecting to.
Really high. I would put Star Fox 64 in like top five.
Yeah.
I think it was an excellent game. I was really surprised by that one. If we're talking about like surprise differential, Star Fox 64 absolutely makes the list. It's just that, you know, in terms of the question, what are the three overall best games? So I chose the games that I enjoyed the most as opposed to the games which surprised me the most. But Star Fox 64 also had those water levels. My God, terrible.
Unfortunate blemish on an otherwise incredible game. Yeah. I think Pod Race would be up there for me. It's one of my all-time favorites. I just love the speed and the track design.
All the
Um,
shortcuts, yeah.
oh yeah, so fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, those would be up there. So great question, thank you. And he then asks the question we alluded to earlier. This is Buster Wallop again. Is there a game from the show that you have found yourself coming back to and replaying more than any other? Yes, it is Mushihime-sama, the shoot 'em up we did. I didn't realize how fun this genre was until we played that game. Like, I'd played it a little as a kid, but holy hell, I think it's like my favorite genre of game now. There's just nothing but gameplay and good music, right? It's just fun. I play that game every couple of months to give it a whirl. I've since moved on to playing other shooters, but yeah, that one, I think the fact that you can play it and be done with it in 20 minutes also helps. Like, you don't have to commit, a week of time to replaying it is very, very, good for that kind of thing. Other than that, the ones that I consider replaying are stuff like Katamari for similar reasons, the ones that are short and to the point. But in general, I kind of want to keep moving forward and playing new things rather than doing what I did when I was a kid, which is replaying my favorites over and over. So I generally won't come back to a game we've done for the show once we finish it.
Yeah, kind of similar, but I will say that the way I've answered this question is more in terms of expansions and fan missions. So after I played the Thief games, I played a few standalone fan missions, most recently the Black Parade, which is a set of levels for Thief Gold. So it leans more heavily into the exploring dungeon side of things as opposed to the robbing mansion sides of things of Thief 2. Very scary. I don't know what it is about the Thief games, but it is actually scary to play Thief today with the graphics and the sound design. It's fucking horrifying. I still get scared of it today, and at times I've stopped playing the Black Parade because it's too scary for me. Resident Evil got me into survival horror as a genre. So before, I just did not play games from this genre, and now it's one of my favorite genres. I think that survival horror is all about resource management and opportunity cost, and I really like the idea of having scarce resources in a game. I don't think survival horror in general pushes this concept nearly far enough. The game that comes to mind that does is Pathologic 2. That is a game where you actually have resource scarcity, but most of the time you are given more than enough. So the one thing I'm hoping for is that games continue to push resource scarcity further and further to the point where you actually need to make difficult decisions. Pathologic 2, one of the few games where that is
resource scarcity is one of those things that falls under that umbrella that we discussed earlier, where playtest feedback will always, stray you from the path of being firm and making that matter.
Yeah,
I think.
See, Resident Evil 4, which, I have less of a problem with because it's an action game, but Resident Evil 4 effectively doesn't have resource scarcity because it gives you resources when you need them, and it gives you less resources when you have them. So it produces a smooth experience, but it gets rid of that friction I was talking about. So
yeah, a lot of people are forced to make decisions that matter all the time in their daily life, and they want to come and play a game to relax that isn't so punishing. I'm not one of those people, but I can kind of respect the opinion. But God, give me more of that. Pump it into my veins.
Yeah. I think that my final answer to this question, though, is kind of the most true, which is that Doom mission packs, they call them Doom WADs, so custom Doom maps, are the thing that I've played the most of. I've probably played 4 or 5 of them over the years.
Yep.
Doom, to me, is kind of like the same as Mario in a lot of ways. Doom and Mario have a lot of these components that are excellent and produce interesting challenge, and the base games they're in don't push those concepts nearly as far as... Sorry, what was that?
They're very modular, right? Like
Very
you can
modular, yes.
take all the Lego bricks and put them together in new and interesting ways any number of times.
Absolutely. And that's why Doom Wads are so fantastic, because people have been making Doom Wads for literally 25 years, longer than 25 years. People, I guess it's 30 years now, gross, for a very long time. People are very, very, very good at creating interesting combinations of things, and they know how to make levels now. And as a consequence, you have all of these Doom Wads of different difficulty levels, to the point where you can literally play Doom Wads of gradually escalating difficulty level, which are all awesomely designed. And I still like going back to them, because there is something about them which is just better than any FPS in existence to this day, because they're so perfectly and deliberately designed. I don't know. They're still special to this day. So yeah, for me it's Doom Wads. I still play them. I intend to continue playing them. And although I will never get close to the higher difficulty level, these high difficulty level ones, James, are just ridiculous.
Crazy. Yeah.
Just absolutely absurd. I'll never get there. There's still a bunch of the medium difficulty level that I can still engage with and enjoy, I think. So, yeah, Doom Wads.
There's actually a couple of other games that I thought you might have mentioned, and they weren't really playing the same game we did on the show, but rather playing the sequels for. And I thought you would have mentioned either Professor Layton or Ace Attorney, which is interesting to me, because on the review of Ace Attorney 1, I think you were lower on it than I was. However, after we did that episode, Patrick went on to play, almost every game in the series in his own time.
So I played another, three Ace Attorney games, start to finish. And then I stopped, unfortunately. I think the Ace Attorney games are I absolutely adore the puzzle parts of these games. I love them to pieces. But holy shit, the storytelling in these games is unbearable. It is so slow. It is so slow and labored and time consuming. It goes on and on and on and on. When these things could be, 4 or 5 hour games, instead they're 20-hour games. And 15 hours of that is shit I just do not care about. Terribly written melodramas. So yeah, I'm a fan of Ace Attorney, sure, but holy shit, I wish someone would make a game like this that just got rid of all of that story shit and made them more pure story games. Sorry,
isn't that what
games.
Case of the Golden Idol is? That's a game you've recommended to me a few times.
Case of the Golden Idol is one of my favorite puzzle games ever. The sequel just came out, which I have been consuming at an incredible rate. And yes, they're basically, for those who know Obra Dinn, it's basically Obra Dinn but compartmentalized. Instead of it being one big puzzle, you instead have more distinct puzzles. They have excellent storytelling that isn't shoved down your throat. It's a lot more it's a lot more subtle in how it chooses to tell its story. Yeah, play Case of the Golden Idol. They're the best. I love them.
It's on sale right now, I think.
I think it's a winter sale at the moment, so I think everything's on sale. But yes, the first game and the second game are both excellent. The first game is probably better at this stage based on my experiences with the second game, but they're still really good. It's basically more of the same. So,
alrighty. So we then move on to a question from Yorkie Duval. Thank you for the question, and he asks, with you having done the show for more than 100 episodes, do you feel it's difficult to play games without being overly critical of each element? Or can you just still sit down and enjoy a game without thinking too hard? Which I think is a great question, by the way.
And it's one that has a very sad answer.
Yes.
I reckon this is something I really struggle with, actually. I think there's a lot of games that I try to play today where I can't just let go and enjoy them. I think that to some degree, at the end of the day, video games are a lot of smoke and mirrors, right? They're a lot of smoke and mirrors that if we can ignore them and become immersed in the experience, that we can just enjoy them and enjoy, I guess, the feelings washing over us. For me, a lot of those smokes and mirrors over the years have kind of dissipated. part of that is because I've played a lot of games, so I can identify stuff. But I think even more importantly, I've spent a lot of time thinking about games and how they're put together. So when I sit down in front of a game, I can quickly lose interest in it if it's not like a tight experience. I had
Yeah.
this experience. So recently I've been playing Stalker 2, despite being incredibly buggy, it's still got some good shooting mechanics. I was kind of just going from outpost to outpost, murdering everyone, which was enjoyable. You know, you get slight upgrades along the way. But I realized that the thing that should be gluing this game together, which is like this immersive overall experience of moving through the wasteland, I was not enjoying at all. Like, I just wasn't getting anything out of it. I wasn't immersed in the world. For me, it was purely a mechanical experience of having a gun and killing 20 people in an outpost, which was good, but not incredible. And I was like, man, I wish I could, go back to a time where I felt more immersed in a world like this, but I just can't anymore. Open worlds in particular, I just feel like they're wasting my time in between the gameplay bits. So definitely when it comes to open worlds, I am off them in a big, big way.
Yeah, this is interesting for me. I think it comes down to whether how close the game is to something we've done on the show a bunch of times. Like, and this I've gone on record many times stating that 3D platformers are one of my favorite genres ever. But I've just played so many that I don't feel the need to play more. I have less of a problem enjoying things in the moment and more of a problem now identifying something that I actually want to begin playing to begin with. Because we've just like covered every genre enough times at this point that like I tend to pick things like lots of JRPGs or shoot 'em ups or like long games or multiplayer games, things that we just won't cover on the show a lot. So by picking stuff like that, yeah, I can enjoy it, and mostly like multiplayer experiences with friends, I can still get into just fine. One of the other things that I have issues with now is finding games that are complex enough for me. I have a big complexity fetish. I don't think that's like secret at this point. I love games that are systems upon systems upon systems that are generally like quite off-putting for new players, but the puzzle of solving these things is really engaging for me. Like, and I need something really complex to get my brain spinning like that, and the average game coming out does not really do that, especially single player titles tend to not have enough. Like, to get us like a game like that, you need like a decade of development time that's ongoing in order to add that kind of complexity. So I find it really hard to find single player games that scratch that itch. Recently played Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, and that, being built upon a very old tabletop system, managed to do that for me. But other than games as a service games, I really struggle to find that in single player these days.
It's kind of interesting because I would say I'm craving the opposite. I like games which are simple and tight and focused. So
Mm.
one of the things I like about Celico is that it's such a focused FPS kind of experience. It's got very little fluff. It doesn't have a big open world. You kind of just move through area to area, getting a gradually expanding arsenal, fighting tougher encounters with every step of the way. And that's the whole video game.
Yeah.
I'm not really looking for something incredibly complex. I want something that's tightly designed. I'd say that's the key idea, tightness.
Yeah, that is also something I cherish, which is why Codename Bakery has been my favorite game of the year.
Yeah.
It somehow manages to thread the needle around both of these things at once.
Yeah, that's a really fair point, it seems. Whereas the complicated stuff, I have to admit, my problem with the complicated stuff is that to me
It
it's
always
like
feels very loose.
well, it's a lot of investment for me, to get your head around a complicated game. And what if the game isn't
Yeah.
even good? You spend 10 hours playing it and it's not a good game, but you've spent all of this time trying to comprehend its systems. So I'd
Yeah.
have to know for sure that the game is good before spending all that time on it. Yeah, so basically to answer the question, yeah, it has changed the way. And, in a way it's for the worst because I can't just let go and enjoy video games in the way that I used to be able to. Okay, next question also from Yorkie Duval. He has a few here. Do you have a game or a game genre you consider a guilty pleasure? James, do you?
Yeah, yeah, I've got an answer for this one. So I mentioned earlier that shoot 'em ups has become my favorite genre almost. I scoured the internet looking for games that were really good in this genre. A lot of the criticisms we had of Mushihime-sama hold true for a lot of them, is that they're too focused on one coin clears and things that make replaying them an absolute slog. It took me a long time to find well-made games that had like level-based progression that eases you in, because what I was looking for was something that would let me start on an easier difficulty and then over time work my way up until the screen was absolutely filled with bullets and you can barely find gaps, right? So I found this one game recommended in a dozen different reviews, and they all came with the caveat that if you can get past the art style, this is one of the best games mechanically. And the game that I picked is called Cosmo Dreamer, which is a shoot 'em up developed by an indie developer that has possibly the most saccharine art style I've ever seen in a game.
Oh, gross.
It's quite off-putting even for me, and I don't normally bulk at this kind of thing, but for me it's too much. I would basically not want other people to know I had this on my games list. And the sequel is even worse in this regard, because he goes from insufferably cute to insufferably cute and also unbelievably over-sexualized. It's really off-putting. But it's also one of the best games I've ever played. It's really annoying. So I've dumped like a few hundred hours into this guy's games. They're incredible. The patterns are amazing. The thing I like about them the most is that no other game other than Celeste, to me, has had such a smooth progression curve where you go from the absolute bottom of the ladder smoothly to the hardest shit imaginable. And there's always a path forward. There's always, because the way it works is there's 4 difficulty levels, there's 10 stages, and like level 7 on easy is about the difficulty of level 1 medium. So there's like this little overlap, which means that if you get stuck, there's 2 or 3 levels that you can play instead of having to grind the same one over and over. And yeah, I'm up to playing through on Nightmare on his games, which is like difficulty 4 out of 5. And they're just incredible. Music's amazing. I'm going to play one of the songs for the music break. If you can get past the art style, this is now one of my favorite games ever. But goddamn, 90% of you are not going to be able to do that.
I mean, it sounds good because that was probably my biggest problem with Mushihime-sama. It was the difficulty curve or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
So if that can fix that, I can see. But yeah, I had a quick look at the art style. No, thank you.
It's like, God, no.
Yeah. So my answer to this, as it always is Call of Duty. I buy Call of Duty every year. I play it for somewhere between 20 to 50 hours. There's a particular play style I like using in these games, which is aggro sniper with a scope. So I keep the default scope on the sniper rifle, and I enjoy playing very aggressively with it. And I do that in the different modes for 20 to 50 hours. And I feel guilty about it because these games are horrendously commercialized with all the different skins and everything. It is the ugliest, shittiest client in existence. There's so much extra shit you have to deal with, the zombies modes and the battle royale modes, and but there's something about Call of Duty, like the more basic team arena, team deathmatch, King of the Hill style game modes that I still find really fun to engage with. I like unlocking things and the progression systems in these games. I like the basic combat in these games. And actually, they tend to be what I like nowadays is they give you very detailed stats on all of the guns, like very detailed stats. Whereas before, a lot of that stuff was hidden away from you, so the comparative stuff wasn't as good. The games have kind of been on a rocky road with some being better than others, but I still enjoy them to this day, and I buy them every year. I waste a bunch of money on them. I enjoy the mindless fun of shooting people on the head, and I probably will continue to do so for quite some time. So, Call of Duty, guilty pleasure. I think part of the reason it feels guilty is that Call of Duty games have gotten a lot of shit thrown their way. People view Call of Duty as something that dude bros play, right? As these games for big dumb idiots.
The kinds of people who buy an Xbox and only play FIFA and Call of Duty and have never seen or even know of another video game. Yep.
But the thing is, in a way, that doesn't make me feel guilt. It makes me feel anger because fuck you. You play shitty JRPGs and think they're the greatest thing ever, but you're throwing shit at Call of Duty. I would say in a lot of ways, those old Call of Duty games are significantly better than the shitty RPG games that you think are so fucking great. So fuck you. I don't feel guilty. I feel mad. I enjoy the games I enjoy. But at the same time, Call of Duty games can be very, very terrible. So I don't know. I just think there's a bit of residual guilt there because of how these games are portrayed in media. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the broader consensus. And I can get behind that. I honestly, like, you know, for all those feelings about them, God, they have a lot of effort put into gunplay, right? Like, they feel nice to play.
Yeah. And I enjoy that play style. And Call of Duty lets me, because it's such an open-ended FPS game, unlike something like, you know, the Overwatch clones or whatever, I can actually just play the aggressive sniper play style, which is something that you can't do in Marvel Heroes or whatever. I can always do that in Call of Duty.
We did Call of Duty 1, right? How old's COD 4? That's the one everyone talks about,
So
right?
COD 4 is 2007.
Oh, it's old enough now.
It is. Although, you know, at this point in time, yeah, I don't want to play it.
Nice. Yeah, me neither.
But I loved COD 4.
Sorry, guys.
COD 4 was the game which basically, it didn't invent it. It created the popularized form of multiplayer progression, unlocking guns and stuff.
Yep.
It's funny, Battlefield 2, which I think came out a year or two earlier, 2006. It also had this, but it was ridiculous. So Battlefield 2 had a gun unlocking system where each class had one gun that they could unlock. And you probably had to play for like 50 hours to get one unlock. It's very funny.
Jeez.
Yeah, they eventually changed it, but that was, to my mind, the first time I remember there being like an actual unlock system. Call of Duty 4's was a lot smoother in comparison.
So next question, another from Yoki, and he says, it's been mentioned a few times that Patrick is an avid reader. What are some of your favorite books? And same question for James, for any media outside of gaming.
So I thought I would answer this with a couple of books that I've read this year, one nonfiction, one fiction. So my favorite nonfiction book I've read this year is one called Embracing Defeat by John W. Dower, which is an account of Japan post World War II and the American occupation. I bought this book because I listened to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast series on the battle in the Pacific, which is like, I don't know, 30 hours in total, and I found it fascinating. As an Australian, we have a obviously closer connection to the battle in the Pacific than the wars in the European theater, although obviously plenty of Australians were in the European theater as well. But we had Japanese forces come right to our doorstep at Papua New Guinea. My grandfather was a commando in World War II, and he was in the Pacific, so I had a personal interest in this. And I found it fascinating, I guess, everything about the conflict, but in particular the crazy cultural differences that existed between Japan and the Western nations. And Embracing Defeat is a book that's all about the American occupation and I guess the complexities of that environment, because some of the Japanese welcomed the Americans as liberators. Japan was essentially being run by a fascist dictatorship. For a lot of people, it was like, thank God. But as the American occupation went on, a lot of people became more and more resentful of the Americans because the Americans wanted to hold on to Japan as an outpost to combat the communist countries and so on and so forth. So it was a fascinating read because of, I guess, the incredibly mixed reception and kind of like a unique experience of an occupying force that was more welcomed than maybe any other occupying force in history. So, really interesting book. And if you have an interest in the Pacific theater, I think it's a really nice epilogue to that. That also leads into the Cold War. The fiction book that I read this year that I really enjoyed was called Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. So I'd never read anything by this author, but I'd seen the film No Country for Old Men, which I'm sure many people are aware of. It's an absolute modern Western masterpiece, and this is one that was recommended to me. And I thought it was really, really good. It was a difficult read. It's not the kind of book that you can just sail through easily, but it's kind of similar to No Country for Old Men in that it's a very anti-Western. It is a very nihilistic and dark take on a Western that kind of really eliminates the romanticism of that is often associated with Westerns. I just found it to be a really compelling book, and I like this kind of like dark, gritty um, take on things. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be reading more by Cormac McCarthy. I might actually read the book No Country for Old Men, but yeah, definitely recommend it if you enjoy a darker take on West.
Yeah, as for me, this one's hard because I really don't connect with media the same way that I do with games. Like, I find, like, I have a very short attention span, and gaming is the only media that requires active participation, which I find very helpful for actually having me sit there and, play the game from start to finish, which books and I hate movies. I do not go to the cinema anymore. I do not watch films when people at my house are watching films. I know that I will get bored 20 minutes into this 3-hour slog and want to go do something else, so I don't even bother.
Did you watch June with us? I can't remember.
Yeah, I did. That was good. I had to get up a few times just to walk out around. And some of the bits in June 2, I kind of was wandering off in my mind. I thought 1 was a lot better. But it was fine. I was mostly like there because you guys were invested in it, to be honest, but it was good. I tend to listen to audiobooks more than physically reading books because I find that even though I'm not really engaging with them sitting home and reading them like I used to, if I can listen to a book 20 minutes every day on my walk to work and back, that gives me something to mentally chew on rather than just like boringly trudging down the road, So my favorite book series are His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, which I love to bits, and a few of my childhood friends do as well. And Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. I'm currently reading the most recent book now, which has been great, and the last book was fantastic.
That's still book 4,
right? Book 4 came out a few years ago. Book 5 came out this month.
Okay, time for me to read book 5. I did not know that.
Yeah, Ben's finished it already.
Okay, I'm going to be downloading that after this show.
Yeah. Especially because book 4 ended with like probably, one of the best cliffhangers ever. But yeah, other than that, I watch a lot of anime in my free time. Some of my favorites are a show that Patrick hates, and I've never found anyone else who hates this show, but it's called Dorohedoro, which is one of the most out there settings I've seen in a media. It's awesome. It's basically...
can I defend myself?
Hang on, let me explain the premise first, and you can. So the series is set in a wizard's pocket dimension where wizards in the setting test their arcane magics, and basically it's like a huge slum dimension where explosions and transfigurations and all sorts of awful shit is happening constantly. There is a holiday in the setting where all of the necromancers of the world reanimate all the corpses in the dimension to, test their necromancy powers. And the citizens of the world have kind of taken this in stride because they know nothing else. They know nothing of a better place. So every time they kill the corpses, they bury them again with a silver coin in the back of their head so that next year you can retrieve the coins and say, hey, look, I buried 30 corpses this year. I win. It's just absolutely great. I love it to bits.
So to defend myself, I don't hate Doro. I just find it really difficult to get into the darkness of it when it's so slapstick comedy-esque. I find that the conflicting tone of the show really hard to get my head around. I think it is just a comedy, but if it's a comedy, then all the dramatic moments I don't give a shit about, and I can't care about the dramatic moments if it's not a comedy, then it's just a silly show. I just find it hard to reconcile its tone, and that's
Yeah,
kind of why I'm a bit off the show. I just I feel like it just can't commit to a lane. So I just yeah, there's something about it that I find very off-putting.
comedy is definitely more of where it's at. It's mostly about different groups of characters making do with an unimaginably shit situation or just life in general. I find one of the things I like about it the most is that the sort of like villain squad almost gets more characterization and is in some ways more likable than the main characters. I just thought that the way it plays them off each other is awesome, even though there's a lot of times where they don't even interact for stretches of time. But yeah, I love it to bits. And then the other shows, Nichijou, which is very well known to be great. Steins Gate, another one of those super popular shows. Probably the best time travel adaptation in a media that I've seen.
Also, probably, I just want to shout Steins Gate as one of the best introductions to anime that you can show someone. If someone's interested in anime, I think it's a great.
Yeah, it's one of those rare shows that is like, it's sort of like a gateway drug show without being things like, I find stuff like DBZ or Naruto or all those kinds of shows.
Those aren't real shows.
As you watch them and you watch more shows, you realize that they're not, they're like the Call of Duty of anime.
I don't even know if they're that. They're like objectively bad. They're just things that kids watch, right? They're actually children's shows. Whereas I think that a lot of anime is probably more like stuff aimed at teenagers,
Teenagers, young adults kind of thing.
Dragon Ball Z feels like it's aimed at 8-year-olds, which is fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that trying to get someone into, someone who's, 23 into Dragon Ball Z is just the stupidest shit. It doesn't make any sense. Whereas they can probably still enjoy a show made for 17-year-olds or whatever, right?
Although my father loves Goku, and he watched it when he was like 30, 40, right? So I don't know. There are a lot of people who love it still. I can't disagree with them.
To be clear, I love it, but it's...
Yeah, who doesn't love Dragon Ball? Yeah. There's one more show I'll go to bat for, which is something that came out recently, and because of the way it was released, it sort of came out, because anime comes out in seasons, which Patrick struggles to understand.
Correct. I do struggle.
And this show came out on an obscure streaming service halfway through a season, but is like one of the best things I've watched recently, and it's called Dead, D-E-D-E-D-E-D-E. It is got an awful name, but man, I love every character. It's basically... the world has been invaded by aliens, but the aliens kind of drive their saucer like above Tokyo, and then they just do nothing for like 10 years or something. It just sits there menacingly, observing, and they get no communication, no nothing. And it's like, half the show is like slice of life stuff, following characters just being themselves. And in the background, you're watching these news stories about how the government is trying to deal with the fact that there's this massive saucer. Like, what is it going to do? Is it going to try and end us? There's all sorts of military operations between the US and Japan trying to deal with it. They start attacking it. It doesn't attack back. They start chipping bits off it and stealing them to research their own technology. And just the way that the background stuff happens in between the rest of the show progressing is just really entertaining. I
Sounds
found it
interesting,
great.
actually. There's a series called The Three Body Problem by Six and Loon, and one of the things that he writes about is how the very knowledge that or certainty that alien life exists would change us as a species fundamentally. Like,
Mm,
philosophically, as a species, we broadly believe that we're the only intelligent life in the universe. I don't mean in the sense that we can contemplate the possibility of other intelligent life, but so much of our understanding of self and religion and philosophy, it's kind of built in this idea that humans are the only ones that exist. If we knew for sure, like for sure, that there was other alien life out there, it would change us. It would just fundamentally change us and change how we view the world and our lives and others. It sounds like that show might touch on that concept a little bit.
yeah, it's quite interesting. And then animation's generally pretty good too. So yeah, I would go to bat for that one. So the next question from Yorkie Duval, fondest childhood gaming achievement memory.
Okay, so for me, this is a pretty easy one, actually. I would say that it is my time messing around in Halo 2. So, Halo 2 has a bunch of secrets and Easter eggs and ways to get out of bounds of the level. And I absolutely loved doing this to pieces. It felt like I was breaking the game in two. And in fact, you can break the game in two in a whole bunch of different ways and sequence break and make it so the level doesn't work anymore. And I love doing it. The best part about Halo 2, as opposed to other games, is that a lot of times in these stupid out of the way areas, the developers had put stuff. The most, I guess, interesting of all was the Scarab gun. So there's a thing in
Mm,
Halo 2, this big walking mech tank thing called the Scarab, and it has this deadly laser that can destroy tanks in one hit. And what Bungie had done was up on top of effectively a skyscraper in the level with no way to get up there was a plasma rifle that was actually a scarab gun. And they just put it in the level with no clear way to get up there. I think with no intended way to get up there, with the understanding that players would probably figure out how to get up there eventually. And through a very convoluted series of events, you could get that gun, which involved pushing a vehicle through a loading screen that you weren't meant to be able to get into in the first place. And it was marvelous. It took hours of my life to do, and it was worth every penny to get. So I remember that really fondly because it was a lot of fun, I guess, breaking a game in a way that the developers didn't really intend for, but they still left you a secret surprise if you put the effort in together.
that is pretty cool. I really struggled with an answer for this one. Honestly, it's probably like beating any game, like at all. Like when I was a kid, like I was too young to be able to get to the end of games. What would normally happen is that I would be good enough to get halfway through a game, and then the difficulty suddenly eclipsed, like, 8-year-old me's ability to beat it. So the games I owned as a child, I would start like dozens of times and never finish. So each time I finally got to the end of one was like a big achievement. It felt really good.
Hmm.
These days, I've probably finished more games on the show than I have otherwise, just because I have a big tendency to have a short attention span in general. Uh, so, anytime I actually stuck with something start to finish was pretty impressive for me.
This is a good thing about being a PC gamer because cheats were always easily accessible. So when I was a dumb
Yeah,
young kid, we'd put on God mode in Doom. And yes, I could finish Doom at 5 years old if I had infinite ammo in God mode.
that's how I beat Age of Mythology as a child. I gave myself infinite resources,
Yeah.
made lots of dudes, and won the level. Yeah, that's just how it was. Accessibility option for children.
um Final question is one from Yorkie, is also something that another user asked called LeBrownies. And basically, it boils down to if you had to pick one game that you wish was either remade or got a sequel, what title would you choose and why?
Yeah, this one's easy for me. The remake goes to Lobotomy Corporation, which is a fascinating game. It's like a management sim where you control.
Is that game new?
Yeah, it's pretty
I
new.
swear we've talked.
It's pretty new, but the game's pretty poorly made, so it's in a lot of ways kind of bad.
Is that the SCP game?
Yeah, it's like you have
Okay.
all of them and you're doing research on them, and it's very esoteric. I wish it would get remade with better gameplay mechanics because it would be incredible. But as it stands, it's hard to finish because it's like got a lot of rough edges, which arguably make it special.
Can we get a bit more detail on this, James? Because from what you told me, the game seems fine. Aren't you basically you have to test them in different ways while also managing your base because there's a bunch of SCPs that kind of do their own thing, and if you're not paying attention, things get out of control.
Yeah.
In what ways specifically would you like to see the gameplay change?
I think the day-to-day gameplay loop is pretty tedious once it gets hard. Basically, your environment, every day you add a new one to the mix, but you never take away existing ones, even if you completely solve them. So
you have to keep juggling more plates.
Yeah, you have to keep juggling more plates, and you have to keep juggling plates you've been juggling for 40 hours, so it's no longer engaging. Every day takes like 40 minutes because you need to... Every time you interact with one of them, you get a bit of energy, and you need a certain amount of energy to finish the day, and that energy you need goes up and up and up and up. And often over the course of the day, there's this mechanic where every 6 interactions, it triggers a meltdown, which causes something bad to happen. And every successive meltdown is worse than the last. This generally means that the first 20 minutes of each day is mind-numbingly boring and easy. And the last minute of each day is super fucking hard. Which means what tends to happen is you lose the day at minute 40, and then you need to start the day again from scratch doing the same exact, because there's no variance in the game either. So you have to, you basically have a list of, I do it in this order, and you do that in order every single day, and there's 50 days. And you never simplify any of the easy ones. It just becomes like a mind-numbing grind after a point where
I see. So it needs a remix to make it more dynamic, basically.
Yeah, because I think the core idea of the game is excellent. It's just that the mind-numbing grind, which is in fact built into the story in some ways, which makes it hard to remove. I just think that this could be done a lot better. I really like the game despite all its flaws, but I will probably never be able to finish it because I have to cross this mental threshold of dealing with this bullshit.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I think a remake would improve it great. A game for a sequel, I'm going to pick another modern game. I want Potionomics to get a sequel. That was such a good game. I played it every day I got home from work. I played it the second I got home, the second I went to bed. I meal prepped that week, so I minimized the time I wasn't spent playing the game. It was awesome.
Amazing.
I think it had some really cool ideas. The fact that a haggling minigame is effectively you playing Slay the Spire. It's a card game where your cards are like push up the price or stuff like that, but the guys you're arguing against are trying to... It's just super fun. All the characters were fun. The animation was awesome. I loved all the time management and decision making. I would love to play a game with, where they build upon the mechanics. And another one, I hope Cuphead gets a spiritual successor in a different animation style from a different time period. I think that'd be awesome too.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea actually.
Yeah.
You want an anime inspired one, right? Studio Ghibli Cuphead.
God, that'd be cool. I was more thinking I was still thinking along the Disney era, just more like later on from, Cuphead.
Well, Studio Ghibli is Japanese Disney, right?
Kind of, in a way. Although I think they don't do action in the way that I'd want out of something like that. And also, the kind of fluid, cell shaded kind of thing, it'd have to be something before the 90s, I think, like 80s maybe.
I see, yeah.
But, Japanese animation back then was actually very stilted and not fluid. Like,
Yeah. What do you mean? Legend of the Galactic Heroes has great animation. You're crazy.
lots of still heads with moving mouths on static backgrounds back in the day. Cuphead really kind of was the perfect era, though, for it.
Okay, so for me, game that I wish would see a sequel, I picked Tribes Vengeance. So the Tribes games obviously have sequels. Tribes Ascend. I think another Tribes game came out this year, which I didn't play. But what I
you want
really
a
want to
sequel.
see, well, I want a single player sequel. Because I think that the movement in Tribes Vengeance is to this day still superb, and it just doesn't exist in other games in the way it does. We've obviously seen some great movement based FPS games come out, but they tend to be a lot smaller in scale. The thing that made Tribes Vengeance so fun was these massive open levels that you could ski over and do damage. And I think that there is a lot of room for someone to push the single player aspect of this further, but it just hasn't happened. They focused on the multiplayer games, which are of course excellent, but I'd love to explore this more in a single player way. But I don't think there's anything out there. I don't even think there's really a indie spiritual ripoff that does single player Tribes to my knowledge. If there is one, I'd love to hear about it. So the game that I want to see remade, and this is a bit of a wild one, but it's Ecstatica.
Oh my god.
So Ecstatica is a terrible video game, and RT Signers should be beaten for suggesting it to us 30 times for the show. However, there was something very interesting about this game, which was that it immediately put you in shitloads of threat. You had to kind of explore with getting threatened in every direction, and it didn't feel safe at all. So I guess to boil it down, because I just said the same thing 3 times, it was this immediate sense of danger from a whole bunch of ways and feeling unsafe in a whole bunch of ways and having to desperately scramble to survive from the get-go. I don't think this is something that really exists in any other game I've played. Can you think of one, James?
Honestly,
the way Ecstatica makes you feel right at the start, where every direction you go, it's trying to kill you, and you don't have an easy way to deal with the threats.
I felt that way a bit about the start of Resi 2, actually. When I was like, because I hadn't played in a while, whereas I think you'd played since then, so my ability to grasp the controls was a bit diminished to begin with. And everywhere I went, there was like a horde. It was like, oh my god. And then on my second playthrough as the other character, it was like super easy. But yeah, that first few hours was rough.
Yeah, so I guess what I want from a remake of Ecstatica, maybe it doesn't even need to literally be Ecstatica. I just want a game to capture that feeling. It can have the light puzzle solving and survival horror elements, but I just thought it was interesting how weak and vulnerable and hopeless you felt and how strong the threats you had to deal with were. So in that sense, yeah, I think that you could take this concept and really push it further. Yeah.
I think those are pretty good answers. Right. Now for something completely different, Judge Holden asks us, can you tell us the story of how you all met and decided to start this podcast? Were there some arguments, discussion over certain games that made you all think we should do a podcast? And my memory of exactly why we started the podcast is simply one day I looked at my phone and I had a message from Patrick that said, "Oi, we should start a podcast." And I replied, "Okay." And then we did it, and here we are. I actually don't think I asked, and I don't know what made you decide to do this.
I mean, it just seemed like a fun idea. Like, I love at the heart of it. Like, I love talking about and thinking about and analyzing video games. I was doing it with people online. I was doing it with my friends in real life. So it seemed like an opportunity to do it in a more formal way. As for like the specific arguments we had, I can't even fucking remember, James. That was like 5 years ago. Do you remember any specific
I
arguments we
remember
had?
us talking about Celeste. I remember. Okay, so the how we met side of this, we have to go back a bit further from before we met to my living situation. So I live in this house that's this shitty share house, and I've lived in this house for 14 years at this point, right? With the same people this whole time because the rent never went up and housing is expensive these days. And I'm still in my shitty share house with my friends, like just doing whatever. And as is the case with houses like this, you often get people who say, "Can I stay the night?" or "Can your friend stay a couple of nights? He's lost his job or he's been kicked out." And of course, you always get asked these questions after you've been drinking for a while, and you say, "Yeah, sure," in this jolly way. And then that person comes and they sleep on your couch for, like 6 months, not 2 days, right? 6 months and they don't pay rent. That's happened like, I don't know, like 8 times in these last 14 years. But one such person was a person who played Magic the Gathering, the card game. And I had played in uni, but wasn't super hadn't kept up with it very much. But he was super into it, the kind of person who goes every week to play with people. And eventually it got roped in on going with him every Wednesday to play Modern, which is where I met Patrick. I don't remember if, how you and Ben met or how we started interacting with you guys, but at some point we started interacting, and then at some point Ben stopped being able to go, which then meant I started driving you to Magic because you didn't have your license yet. And then then you got your license and started driving me there to get experience driving. And that's my recollection. Man, I feel like my memory is so bad of those days. I vaguely remember sitting there between rounds of cards, playing Xenoblade Chronicles 2 on my Switch, and you looking and telling me that looks like the worst shit you've ever seen.
Which it was, right?
It wasn't very good, no. But I liked it a lot more than, my initial impression was higher than it ultimately was, 10 hours later. And I don't remember how we got to the point of starting a podcast together without realizing just how different our tastes in video games were, but...
Well, that's why we did it, because we were arguing a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I gotta say, I can't remember exactly what the arguments were about. Probably some stupid shit based on the first few episodes. Yeah, we were a lot more militant on our opinions back in those days. Well, particularly I was.
Yeah, we were all, it's kind of impressive. I think that's one of the things I know I have certainly grown in this way, that I can accept other people having opinions that I don't share and not be as surprised at it. I always knew that people's subjective experience was wildly different to one another, but I don't think I really understood that until we started the show properly.
I've kind of gone the other way in some ways, in that I embrace subjective experiences, and I think subjective experiences and having different opinions is a good thing.
I agree.
I think the real awful people are the ones who insist that you can't have an opinion, or that you're objectively wrong, or that certain things are objectively better than others.
Yeah.
There's room enough in the world for multiple opinions on things, and we should be encouraging people to share those opinions. That doesn't mean all opinions are equal, but don't try and stop people from having different opinions to you. And there's no need to demean or insult a person for having a particular opinion. Keep the bashing and rudeness towards their opinions, not the person espousing them.
This comes from the guy who just said we should beat the guy that recommended us Ecstatica, by the way.
Yes, luckily that was a joke and not my actual opinion.
God damn. But yeah, that's kind of...
Listen, was it better or worse than Deadly Premonition? That's the real question.
Deadly Premonition is one of the video games ever made.
Yeah.
There's a particular memory of the early days that I want to share, which is there's two actually. So at this point, Ben and I recognized that we were both chronic weebs, but Patrick loved Western stuff, right? So there was this time Patrick drove us all the way down to the Gold Coast to play Magic. And this was like the first big trip you ever did, right? Like, this was your first hour-long car trip that wasn't with like an instructor. And so we went with him. One of Ben's friends has since moved to Japan and came over for a visit and left him with like a physical CD filled with idol music, like songs off K-On!, stuff like that. Like, extremely saccharine weeb shit. And Patrick, like, left us in the car to go and, like, pay for the parking fare or something. And Ben and I snuck the CD into his disk drive. And then while he was driving, like, said, "Oh, there's a CD, you should play it." And he turns it on. And we've obviously, like, cranked the volume as loud as it will go in anticipation. It just starts blasting one of the K-On! Songs, like, in the middle of the road. It was so funny.
I thought there was something wrong with my car. At first, I thought it was the radio. I didn't understand what was happening.
We were just, like, in tears laughing. It was so good.
Also, that drive back was in the midst of like a terrible thunderstorm. And it was just like, and this was my first long drive ever, and I thought I was gonna die, but we made it.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah. The second one was Ben went to Japan and he came back with a very polarizing playmat that we spent the whole day, like every time Patrick went to the bathroom, we tried to we were going to replace his playmat with this extremely anime one so that he would sit down for his match and then put the mat out on the table and then turn bright red because it was like horrific.
I don't remember this.
No, it's because we learned that day that you always take your bag with you no matter where you go, even if it's like to the bathroom or something. It was so disappointing and we never got to do it, but man, we tried.
See, I don't trust you guys for a reason, clearly.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so there are some memories, and I'm sorry I don't remember more clearly, but it was too long ago.
Yeah, lots of talking about how good Celeste is, though.
Judge Holden also asks, given the plethora of single-board computer gaming devices these days, do you guys play games on handhelds much, or do you mostly stick to standard PC console gaming on a monitor or TV?
These last couple of years, I've basically only played on PC, and I think a part of that is due to the fact that because the Switch was such a runaway success, Nintendo has not needed to update the hardware for some time, and so in these last recent years, it just does not cut it. Like, even the shitty games I want to play on my Switch run like arse. Indie games are bearable, but like generally I'm so comfortable with mouse and keyboard now, or an actual controller like a PlayStation controller, that I don't. It's like the perfect VM, like visual novel machine or something like that. But that's like a genre that's kind of like dead in the water at the moment. So I'm not like opposed to wanting to play handheld. It's just that there's not a lot of titles that are coming out that convince me to want to do so.
Yeah, I still predominantly play on PC. I've just got myself a Steam Deck, so I am messing around with some more handheld stuff. Yeah. It came out in Australia, so I didn't have to get it through the grey market, which was the only way to get it in Australia, so I'm happy to have that now. I'm still in the process of setting up EmuDeck, but I'm pretty sure I'll mainly be using it as an emulation machine. Also, as ridiculous as it is, I think that having a Steam Deck to play with while I have something else going on, my computer monitor is how I'll also use it.
Or like you'll watch a movie or something, or background noise.
Exactly, yeah. Well, we were talking about how I played a lot of Ace Attorney. One of the times where I played a lot of Ace Attorney was during the World Chess Championship. I think it was in 2022 or 21, whenever it was. Because chess is slow and boring, so you need something to do while doing it. Or, while you're watching the cricket on TV, you can play with a handheld device. So I haven't historically, but now that I have a Steam Deck, probably I'm going to start doing it more.
Interesting. Yeah, the only other thing I will play is my 3DS, just because like the games that are on it, you really can't play on like on PC, or I mean, it just doesn't work as well without like physical screens and a touch screen.
It's interesting, given how the Steam Deck is designed, there's no reason that that screen couldn't be split up and effectively give you the same experience as a 3DS, I don't
Yeah,
think.
I kind of feel that way, although not a lot of developers seem to be interested in doing that. Like, I've got an attachment for my Switch to play it in vertical instead of horizontal, so I can play shoot 'em ups on it.
Yes.
And that would work just fine. Like, that would work
It'd be
great.
exactly the
Exactly the
same, yeah.
same, just split the screen in half. But yeah, it's not like a lot of demand for that at the moment. I think we're still in this period where the industry and collective community as a whole is still reeling from that period like 2010 to 2018 where the Wii and Connect and all that kind of gimmicky bullshit dominated the market for so long that we're probably just only now getting over that mental fatigue. Like, it was pretty nice for Nintendo to finally do like the Switch, which it has a gimmick for sure, but that gimmick, like, it feels less gimmicky than some of the shit they did previously, if that makes sense. So,
I think the other thing standing in its way, James, is that every console and PC and Mac, and they're all just the same now.
yeah,
Like they're all just computers,
yeah,
right? At the end of the day, they're all computers. So building something hyper specifically for the 3DS, like the 3DS screen, doesn't make a whole lot of sense because you wouldn't be able to implement it the same way on PC and Xbox and PlayStation and
yeah, and you
whatever.
just cut out your
So
market if you do that.
yeah, so you should make something that can be played on everything, including phones, because they're just all computers now. Whereas previously, you had a unique piece of hardware where you made games exclusively for it. There wasn't an indie market, so it didn't make sense to do it otherwise. You were developing it for a Nintendo platform, so it made sense to
You know
innovate and
what?
play around
Earlier
with
we
the
had a
hardware.
question that was like, what's something you wish would come back? And I'm like, gimmicky consoles, that's my new answer for that question. Bring them back to me.
Yeah, I think they're dead and dusted, mate.
Yeah,
Like, why would you buy a gimmicky console when you can buy a console that can play everything? Like, a Steam Deck can play everything. Like, a Steam Deck is a
I
Switch,
agree.
by the
But
way,
it's like,
for those who don't
why
know.
would you do pre-baked lighting when you can just turn it on in Unreal and be done with it?
Or it's a hard ask for a developer because you're asking them
Give
to
up profit margin, right?
have a
Yeah,
small audience,
yeah,
right? Like, that's a real or like develop two entirely different UIs.
yep, yeah.
You
It's
know,
not good.
they're indie developers. It's asking a lot of them, I think.
Yeah,
Not impossible,
in
but
AAA dev, it's too risky to do something like that too these days.
why even
Yeah.
bother? You don't get anything out of it,
What?
right?
You get amazing things like WarioWare Shake It, or
Yeah.
like, I don't know. There's stuff that's cool, but yeah, I think it's a bit dead these days. Um,
The question is like, are those games better than like Pizza Tower? I should buy Pizza Tower. That
God,
game
yeah, you should
sounds
buy Pizza
amazing.
Tower. I love it.
Yeah.
I need to finish it, but I'm up to this point in the game where I can't do the last level until I go back and do the other levels a bit better. Like,
I hear it's like a good like a Wario game, but also a good Sonic game.
yep, I agree with both of those things. It's
Yeah.
really good. Um, so Rosso Dude then asks us, indirect counterpoint to LeBrownie's question, since I am a guy who ideologically opposes remakes. Can you think of a game that, were you to hear it is going to be remade, you would be convinced that the remake would fail to capture the original game's spirit as it is reinterpreted through modern lens? In essence, if you heard a game was being remade, would you groan? Like, what kind of game would do that to you?
So, unlike Rosso, I am not ideologically opposed to remakes. I think that a lot of remakes are terrible, and I think that a lot of them are cash grabs, and a lot of them don't understand the essence of what it is they're trying to remake. But I'm not ideologically opposed to them because throughout history, from you know the Iliad and the Odyssey, and the way we retell hero stories and everything, we've been remaking and retelling the same stories over and over again, right?
Hmm.
I I don't think it's a problem. That being said, I do understand where he's coming from in that a lot of the time remakes can absolutely destroy the essence of what made the original so special. And it can even lead to people saying that the original is obsolete, which can be very frustrating when it's offering just a different experience. Uh, the game that I guess I would be most skeptical of them saying or worried about them making a remake would definitely be Arx Fatalis.
Ah,
So the reason for this is that I think Arx Fatalis is kind of like a messy game. It's this peculiar blend of dungeon crawling, exploration, and puzzle solving. So it's kind of like this. I don't know. It's not a clear. It's not a clear, understandable game. It lets you kind of stumble your way through it in the wrong order. You get lost. You make mistakes. You learn from them. You come back. And I guess my concern with remaking a game like this is that a lot of those rough edges would be hewn or shaved off to make something easier to understand. And I think that in the process, you could lose the soul of what it is that makes this game special. But I'm not as, I guess, I don't think remaking games like this in a good way is impossible. I just think it's very difficult. We had a bit of a discussion where Rosso claims that Pathologic 2 isn't really a remake of Pathologic 1, and I have to say I disagree.
really?
I think Pathologic 2 is very clearly a remake of the first game, but it's a remake that's done in such a way that understands the spirit of the first game and kind of builds on it in the ways that it should have, which is because it's by the same developer and everything. And I think that Pathologic 2 is the kind of game that gameplay wise Pathologic 1 would have liked to be if they'd had the time and resources to do so.
Yeah, I do think something was lost in the storytelling in the remake.
I do agree. I do agree with that. But I do think that it's a worthwhile remake. And I think it's a good remake. And I do think that good remakes exist. And that while cynicism towards the idea of remakes and, soft reboots and everything should be encouraged, there's nothing intrinsically problematic about them. For another example, I would say that Blade Runner is a movie that doesn't need a sequel. But Blade Runner 2049 by Villeneuve is a fantastic movie. And in some ways, I think it even eclipses the first. So it's very much, we can have a general rule that these things are bad, but remakes and soft reboots and sequels to things that don't need sequels can sometimes be excellent and well worth your time and very enjoyable in their own right.
Mm. It's interesting to me. Rosso Dude, is well known generally as a good modder. He mods games like System Shock 2, for example, and has a long list of really cool, really interesting changes. I actually think that, from what I can tell, the System Shock 1 remake has been fairly well received.
Depends who you speak to.
Interesting. Okay, I don't have a big stake in it though because I hate the first game. So undoubtedly, I would find the remake better. There's no way, surely.
I think that the remake is basically okay. I think that it's a very overrated game. I did not enjoy it as much as most people did. I don't think it's a bad game though. I don't want to say, oh, this is terrible. I just think that it's I think it's kind of the stuff they added. I don't think necessarily adds a lot. They added a recycling mechanic where you collect junk and then turn it into stuff, and that just leads to you picking up everything off the ground, and it's tedious and shitty. I kind of think that it's an okay game, but definitely could have been done much better.
So I'm not ideologically opposed. I'm just very jaded, which is almost the same thing. I've been burnt too many times by this at this point. I generally won't get excited for a remake, although I was pretty keen on Age of Mythology Retold, but I never got around to playing it. The biggest example of disappointment was when The World Ends With You was remade for touchscreen, and it got rid of the game's battle system, which really did rely on having two screens and two separate methods of input. You fought enemies on the top screen by inputting commands on the D-pad, and you fought on the bottom screen with a second character inputting commands with your touchscreen stylus. Like you had to play 2 games at once. And that just kind of got lost in all of the remakes since. In terms of like a game I'd be very hesitant about, I think the category of game that would make me the most nervous are games that were to begin with happy accidents in a way, or like not products of intentional decisions, but kind of came to be, as really flawed but interesting things. Like, if somebody told me they were remaking Deadly Premonition, I would almost guarantee that I wouldn't enjoy it as much as the first game, because in some ways, the shittiness of the game is part of that enjoyment.
That's a really good point, actually.
Same with something like Kingdom Hearts. If you remade Kingdom Hearts, I almost guarantee that they would make the story like less convoluted and stupid, but it's almost that, like, that's what gives it its charm, right? Like, the story is objectively terrible, but appealing to the teenage brain, right, in a way that I don't think would be captured in a remake in the modern day. There's also a lot of early 2000s games that had this like edgy tone and vibe to them that I think would be stripped away if they were to remake games like that these days.
Prince of Persia: Warrior Within.
Yeah, I vaguely remember one of my favorite, like most played childhood games was Ratchet and Clank. And in Ratchet and Clank 1, the main character, Ratchet, is kind of an asshole. Like, he's not a nice dude for like 90% of the game. He's generally dismissive and rude and obnoxious to the other characters he meets. And part of the story is him overcoming that and becoming a better person. In the remake, he is like the Pixar perfect happy guy from the very beginning, and it just completely devalues that journey, and it made me hate the remake as a result. So I don't think that, like, and I think it's probably good that we've kind of grown out of that edgy teenage phase that gaming was in during the 2000s, but like there is some value to acknowledging part of the history of games and their design, and I think you would lose a lot remaking most of those titles these days.
It's interesting because you picked up on, I guess, the story considerations, whereas for me it was more about mechanically what they'd be changing. But I think both are definitely worthy of consideration.
Yeah, there's like time period things that come into play. So I don't know, is there something gameplay wise? It's hard because stuff like Resident Evil, the remakes are all great. So, it's clearly possible to, not 3 apparently, but clearly possible to do it well. 4 was well received.
Yeah, 4 was well received, and it makes sense, right? Because it's more of an actiony kind of game. So it was had more in common with the Resi 4 remake was good. Although I think that the story did suffer a bit actually, because they tried to be a bit more serious, whereas the first game was obviously very campy and silly. Like with that giant statue chasing you down.
Yeah.
They cut that from the remake. Is like, why?
Why? It's so funny though. Is it time for another break or music break?
Yeah, let's have another music break. But yeah, good questions so far. Thank you, everyone. What song are we going to listen to? Some shitty shoot 'em up music, James?
Yeah, so it is time for a music break. I am in fact choosing a track from my guilty pleasure game, Cosmo Dreamer. I think that the final stage music for this game is superb. It's actually like outsourced music from a website that offers free background music, DOVA-SYNDROME. Because, it's an indie developer. He's gone and found tracks that he likes to put in the game. And I just think that the one he picked for this is just the most hype shit I've ever heard. It's amazing. So this is the Stage 8 theme from Cosmo Dreamer. Alrighty, that is the background soundtrack for one of my favorite levels in the game ever. We now move on to the latter segment of the episode, and we've got a question from, more of a joke question from Judge Holden, which was the fear of Baldur's Gate 2 something you developed as children, or did you just become cowards as grown men? And my answer to this question is in all caps. I was gonna pick it this year.
Are you gonna pick Baldur's Gate 1 first, or are you gonna make me play Baldur's Gate 2?
Maybe we should do 1 first, but we have to do 2 at some point, because a long time ago now, I promised somebody I would play it in exchange for him playing through a game of my choosing, which he did. And then I have since failed to make good on that promise. But
note that this had nothing to do with the podcast. You're just looking for an excuse to actually play through.
So yeah, I'm like, this is my easy out. I'll be forced to finish it. So
yeah, and we will, maybe in 5 years' time.
Yeah, good luck.
It's okay. You can pick it whenever you like, James, and I will.
Well, that's the case with every game.
True enough. Okay. Silent Storm asks, what is some advice your present self could give to your past self about your gaming?
Boy, play shmups, you idiot.
For me, it's like play less multiplayer games. I have spent thousands of hours playing Counter-Strike and Dota 2 and Overwatch, and I think to myself, what if I'd spent that time playing single-player games? I could have played all of them.
Yeah.
All of them.
You could have.
And I mean, I think that it would be nice to have played more single player games, to have a deeper repository of knowledge for all those games.
Yeah, also every time somebody I don't know, stalks my playtime list and they get to Dota and it's 7,000 and I'm like, shut up, don't talk to me about this. I've got a problem.
Yeah. So yeah, that would be my advice. Try to play more single player games.
I've been clean for a few months now.
We'll see how you feel when the international rocks up again.
Yeah, always happens. Also, I should take popular opinion as gospel less often. Especially, that thing you described where people bash Call of Duty for being this dude bro game, but you actually find it really fun. I need to take shit like that. I need to tell it to fuck off and just play a game anyway, because for years I avoided early access survival crafters because they had this stigma of being low quality, bashed together games that aren't very fun.
Yeah, that is not inaccurate in a lot of cases.
Yeah, however, when we played last year, when I played through Valheim, I was like, this is the greatest game I've ever played. It was...
I do think Valheim is in many ways the pinnacle of the genre, or the pinnacle of what it's trying to do.
Yeah.
I don't think that cynicism towards early access survival crafting games in general is a bad thing.
Yeah, but that, if I had just held, I almost didn't play it that week, but got pushed into it by friends and was like, man, there's probably heaps of games where I'm like, the general consensus is this thing's shit, and I've said, no, I don't want to play that, and then it would have actually been fun.
Yeah, for me, it's more disregarding people's opinions on things they think are good. Because people are wrong a lot. So.
Or people... Just because one of my friends really likes something doesn't mean that I'm automatically also going to like that thing. But at the same time, if you don't give in and try it, you don't connect with your friends as much, right? Just go into it.
You need that shared experience.
Yeah, go into it, accept that you're not going to like it as much as they do, and take it as an opportunity to bond. That's...
Hang out.
Yeah.
It's just an excuse to hang out.
Yeah, right? That's...
PUBG is male therapy sessions.
Yeah, I don't need to necessarily enjoy the game itself. I can just enjoy playing something that I don't like with my friends. And that's totally fine. The other thing is probably, I wish I could explain the concept of deliberate practice to my younger self, as opposed to, when I used to play Dota, I would just mindlessly queue up game after game and not really...
You would play for fun.
Yeah, you play for fun, which is... Honestly, that's something I'd want to get back a little bit, but at the same time, I'm glad that nowadays I can approach something more methodically and think this is the path to improvement, and identify clearly my areas of weakness, something I could not do when I was younger. Although I guess maybe you lose something by doing that. So maybe it's good that I had that experience when I was younger, and I have this experience now as I'm a bit older.
I completely agree because I've been playing volleyball for a little over a year now. I just started out of the blue, zero experience with the game before. And one of the things that I appreciate as an adult better, at least now, is that I'm very, very focused on improving my skills. And every time I do something, I'm self reflecting on what I could have done differently and what I could do better and trying to do better the next time. That is something I wish I had done more when approaching sports or whatever as a kid, because while I don't have that, elastic, quick learning stuff, and, my body obviously isn't that of a spry young adult, I feel like I'm improving a lot faster than I did as a kid because I'm so focused on improving.
When you said that, there's this screenshot of Mega Man Battle Network that comes to my mind of this old man character who's hunched over with a walking stick, and he's saying, "I'm 30 years old." That's how I feel.
Well, I mean, definitely when it comes to sports, I'm obviously fit enough, but yeah, when you're 22 or whatever, you're fitter. So
okay, I've got two more things for this question. The first thing, I wish that back in 2006, 2005, that era, that when Bethesda released their Horse Armor DLC, I wish I had taken screenshots of every person who said this will never take off. I think it would be so funny to have all of the screenshots of all of the negative comments around then, just like.
But that was everyone.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't that was like the mainstream opinion. They were ridiculed far and wide by everyone.
Look how far we've fallen as a society. It's over.
See, the Western media didn't understand gacha back then. I bet the Japanese knew what was up.
It was coming, the tide.
Yeah.
The next thing that I would tell my younger self is that when we play games for the show, we do so in isolation, and then we talk about them. I wish that I had demanded that we recorded our playthroughs of Luna Silver Star Story.
Oh, man. Can you imagine? Dude, I was so angry playing that game. Holy shit.
Would have been like...
I was so... It's more like, so the thing is, I was almost going into a catatonic state. Like I say in my write-up that I had 1,000-yard stare while playing that game, and that is so accurate. It wasn't that it was so unengaging. Like I didn't understand. I would get into a battle and do the same thing every fight, and have to go through this this healing process at the end of every fight, because you needed to keep your guys at very high health values because the damage output of the enemies was so high. And I just kept doing that over and over again. And I kept thinking to myself, where is the video game? Like, what are we even doing here?
It's called a gameplay loop.
But do you I don't know, did you not have the same experience? Sorry, I'm getting mad again just thinking about it, but I don't understand, James. I don't get it. What's the gameplay here? It's just doing the same thing every time, and that inventory management healing process was like so many presses and buttons to get to do what you need to do.
Honestly,
I don't understand.
Luna was half a vibes game for me, like just the tone and the world and the whimsy is easy to get lost into.
I fucking hated the tone of that game.
No.
Oh my god.
Anyway, I wish I had a recording of that.
I don't understand. Till this day, James, I do not understand. I don't understand why people get so mad at me not understanding. It just, none of it still doesn't make sense. To this day, after everything that's happened, I still don't understand. We should move on, but fuck me.
Okay, next question. I was super excited for this question. Julie asks us, What's your favorite implementation of inventory, i.e., real time or pause, slow down, grid list, weight limit, space limit, granular, strict, diegetic, abstracted? What is it? And I could go on this for hours. I have a huge bugbear with modern games that have very unstylized, very boring, purely functional UIs. Now, I want to get this out of the way. I don't have a problem with minimalist UIs that seek to just do their job and that's it. What I have a problem with is when there is absolutely zero effort to integrate that UI with the theme of your game. Like, you have this game set in a fantasy world and your UI looks like it's straight out of Windows 11, just plain squares. Like, I don't mind it being minimal, but you can, like, have little stylized borders that look like they're drawn with pen or something. You know, it can be small and to the point, but still in matching the character of the game. These Unreal Engine 5 UIs that are all exactly the same, if I see a modern game trailer that has a UI like this, I just stop watching the trailer. I'm like, I'm not playing that shit, because it tells me that game was developed in a way where the creative people with the vision were kind of offloading work to, you know, grads or something who didn't really care about the world they were making or the game they were doing. A game with a UI like that, to me, cannot possibly be made by a passionate dev team who really cares about integrating the experience of opening your menus with the experience of playing the game. So not every game needs to be like Diablo 2. It takes up half the page and has all this esoteric, like, you know, health bars and stuff like that. But there needs to be like something. Like, the biggest downgrade in a UI ever to me was the jump from Dragon Age Origins, which I don't think has like an over-the-top inventory, but like the spell book looked like real pages with writing on them. They had little, you know, glyphs and stuff. And the Dragon Age 2 UI, which was just all plain lines, like it was done in like a web browser or something. I just hate it so much.
It's so funny, James, because I don't care about that shit at all.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm not touching the game if you don't put effort in.
For me, it's purely functional. I want my inventory to be a very particular way functionally, and if it's that way, I'm super happy. Like, for example, on some of these things that he's brought up, for example, grid or list, give me grid or give me death. If you are on PC, a grid gives you way more visibility of the items in your inventory at a single glance than a list possibly can. Because it's so much easier to get at a glance visually all the shit in your inventory. To me, that's just strictly superior to a list, and it's particularly superior to something like Final Fantasy VII's list.
Which,
and I care a lot more about that than I do the aesthetic
God,
of
the old Final Fantasies have
inventory.
some of the worst inventory UX I've ever seen. Like, the fact that there are these infinitely scrolling lists where if you put your potion 50 down and then you use every other item, it doesn't like compact it up to the top. Like, your inventory will be this empty blue square that you have to scroll down like 10 rows to find one potion. They're all scattered. It's so bizarre.
And when you find a summon, the summon is designated spot 49 on your summon
Yeah,
list.
it's like...
and if you haven't found the other summons, it doesn't matter. It is still in slot 49.
It's like...
And it's real time with pause.
It's like the menu selection. It's like they took Microsoft Excel and then they put every option in a random cell somewhere in the thousands of rows, like east and north.
It probably is that, right?
It's just like, why? In terms of, give me inventory Tetris any day of the week. Love that shit.
Overweight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And the reason for this is I think that inventory Tetris space limit is just an abstraction of weight limit.
Yeah, I
because
agree.
You have certain things which are bigger than others. So this takes up 6 slots. You're basically, instead of it being 18 kilograms, you're saying it takes up 6 slots. way easier to understand
And
and
those big
comprehend.
items, like they feel bigger than the smaller items, right? Like there's something kind of
Yes.
tactile about that I've always enjoyed. One thing,
Basically way more. So I don't know, to me, yeah, Tetris Grid Space Limit is the best way to abstract weight limits without it getting too finicky or confusing.
personally, my problem with these inventories like in Diablo that they refer to as inventory Tetris is that it's not actually Tetris because you can't rotate the blocks. I want to be able to rotate the blocks and squeeze every square out. I think that's like
Don't they have auto sort buttons nowadays anyway?
sort of not in all games.
Do you because I don't actually enjoy inventory Tetris, mainly because it's not like the shapes aren't complicated
I
enough.
agree.
You don't
Yeah, you
have
get like
like S
squares, and
shaped
yeah,
things
you
or
need S
anything.
shapes, you
So
need T blocks.
if they're all squares and stuff,
It's not
then
fun. Yeah.
yeah, it's not fun. Just give me an auto sort button. If they're gonna give me weird shaped things and make it an actual gameplay thing, then it makes more sense.
I think that's actually kind of like the nature of like you've got a bag and you're like, oh, if I put this thing this way and this, I can fit all this stuff. Anyway,
Yeah.
the actual answer for favorite UI is obviously like Persona 5. I think
What's that like? Because I haven't played that
so.
game.
One thing that I like about it is that it's A, super stylish, but it's B, very like it's console orientated. But normally in JRPGs, your selection, what will happen is you use the arrow keys to scroll down to spells, and then you press X, and then you scroll down the list, and then you press X on the item. What Persona 5 does is that on your main menu, it maps every option just to a button. So attack will be square, spells will be triangle, items will be circle. So you don't need to like manually move cursors around. You just press the buttons, super snappy, and then the next menu go in the same. So choosing what option to do in battle takes like literally two button presses instead of click 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 X, click 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 X, click 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 X to pick, that it normally
Right.
is. In terms of like things that I wish things didn't do, he mentions pausing or unpausing, which Dark Souls is what comes to mind originally. I actually wish Dark Souls went a step further and allowed you to just pause the game, but inventory management had to be done at a bonfire.
Yeah, I think that basically, generally real time is better, because it means that inventory management isn't free. And I've always thought that this is the one thing about Pathologic 2, which I think that they should have changed. I think that looking at your map should have been done in real time. Because when I played Pathologic 2, as I was moving around, I would constantly bring up my map. I'd be getting chased and I'd bring up my map, or heading through a district, I'd be bringing up my map non-stop. In infected districts, bringing it up non-stop because there was no danger to doing so, and it allowed me to navigate optimally. If I couldn't bring up my map freely, it would have forced me to navigate my way through that game in a lot more difficult circumstances. And I think that they should have changed that and made it a diegetic map or something to make it less free to look at maps and manage your inventory on the
Yeah,
fly.
philosophically, I agree, but I want to make the distinction that I think inventory and pause should be separate functions because at the end of the day, like sometimes someone knocks on your door or the dog starts barking or your kid, if you have them, like needs their nappy changed or something, right? Like you can't just strictly say no pausing. That just doesn't work, right?
You just need inventory to be separate. Yeah, that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
And I generally prefer diegetic. There are things like I actually really like Peter Jackson's King Kong, the game of the movies inventory or UI because it basically doesn't have one, and it's all like your character talking about the magazines that he has on hand, etc. There's no crosshair. It's all like pure immersion. I think that can actually work really well if you do it right too. So you don't.
Dead Space has quite a cool inventory diegetic if you've ever played that game.
I haven't. Should do eventually. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm open to a wide variety of them. There are, but it's all about like was care and effort put into it, and not we slap together the easiest, most functional thing we could and didn't integrate it into the rest of the game is what I care about the most.
Whereas what I care about is pure functionality, and I think that a lot of games don't have purely functional inventories, and I blame consoles. I think basically what it boils down to is that PC games with a mouse and keyboard give you the best access to a lot of inventory items at the same time because the mouse can just freely move anywhere on your screen very quickly, whereas a controller needs to move between items one at a time in a lot of instances, right? No matter how good your UI is, a mouse is going to be faster for moving between things and selecting them quickly. It's just how it's designed. But I think that a lot of these inventories are designed with probably used to be consoles in mind, and now it's kind of both. But that comes at the potential detriment of the power that a mouse and keyboard offers. So you have something like Morrowind's inventory, which is just a big fuck off grid, which actually is quite useful for a mouse and keyboard that we don't really see much of anymore, just because we need to design UIs with both consoles and PCs in mind. So I want more big fuck off grids, basically. Give me some of the classic PC inventories of yesteryear and update them to make them better, obviously. But I want to see more of that kind of thing that we don't see as much.
Interestingly, I think CRPGs tend to have funky UIs more than any other genre. Like,
agree.
Like
Witcher is fucking awful.
Yeah, Baldur's Gate 3 could have been a lot better in that regard too. The Pathfinder games were like, they at least had tabs for like subtypes, which helped a bit. It was not helped by the fact that like it had a cool items, like BG3 had a cool item system, which meant that oftentimes you'd have like a low-level item that had some unique effect, so you thought that maybe you might want the effect more than the stats later on, so you kept it, and eventually your bags just filled up with so much stuff that was hard to dig through.
What about MMOs? Because obviously MMOs are almost uniquely PC focused in terms of their design. I haven't played many. I definitely haven't played the late game where you have a zillion bags. How do you feel they do inventory management?
So the thing that I think, they're just bags, they're just grids. But the thing that I think sets MMOs apart is they have so much information that they're trying to convey to the player that most of them just give up and allow you to mod your UI to have whatever the fuck you want. So, at a baseline, probably awful, but like generally they're the freest in customization. I know that myself and other people, 90% of people who play World of Warcraft, their UI looks nothing like the default whatsoever.
It's probably higher than 90% of the stuff.
Yeah.
But maybe not. Maybe there are a lot of casual.
And that's totally fine, right? Because like you can get the perfect UI if you want.
But it does show, and I think that does show, interestingly, more what I'm interested in, which is functionality. And clearly there is a way to design these UIs purely for functionality. But from an aesthetic point of view, MMO UIs are awful. Absolutely awful and incomprehensible to anyone but the person.
Yeah, every time you start playing again, you have to turn off all your mods and then like reduce the gameplay down to its like minimum and then build back up. And then after like a week, you've got a spaghetti of a UI again that you can actually interpret. Yeah, great question.
Oh, time for our final question, James.
The final question, yeah.
So this is from Lions in Beta, who's the host of Nostalgia Goggles. We had George, his co-host, on the show for our Mushihime Sama episode, and I did an episode with them on StarCraft 1, a game that I actually enjoyed a lot. And with StarCraft 1, I'm like super into the competitive scene. Like I watch a lot. I watch daily casts. I love competitive StarCraft, but it's really fun being able to actually play the game, the single player game. So definitely go on and check that out. I think you'll find it enjoyable. And he asks, who was the worst main character of any game you've played for the show and why?
This is so hard. This was the hardest question on the whole thing for me because...
Easy question.
I think I know what your answer is, but to me this is hard because the kinds of main characters I hate the most are the self-insert ones that have no personality, Like, it's okay in a CRPG where you make your own character from scratch, but if it's not like that and you have a blank insert anyway, like, actually, Persona 5, again, I really don't care for Joker or, like, those kinds of, like, the game gives you a preset character, but then they don't talk much anyway, because that'll be distracting or some bullshit. I hate that shit, but on some level, I know that there's a big audience for that kind of character, so it's hard for me to say that it sucks. Like, I just. And then most of the best main characters are underwritten. So it's either got to be like a character who talks way too much and sucks, or like a self insert character where you don't really get enough options to do your own thing and you're kind of in this awkward middle ground where you're playing something anyway. I suspect that Patrick was going to say something like Cave Story.
How did you know?
Yeah. And then for me, funnily enough, it's probably one of the main characters from Resident Evil Remake 1, despite me loving that game. They're not very good characters, which is in stark contrast to my love of the game otherwise. Or maybe Adol from East Oath and Felghana, which is also another game I love, but to me, a good JRPG kind of main character is one who goes through a lot of growth over the course of the story. Adol starts as being virtuous or whatever from the very beginning and doesn't really mature as a character. It's kind of like there's development in other characters, but to me that's no fun. I need to see the main character starting from zero or being a piece of shit and then growing into a better person. That's a much better character arc for me.
Yeah, the problem with Quote is, as I've stated before, he doesn't kill the grandma, and he should have killed the grandma. So Quote, he kind of like is a lifeless robot who does what he's told, and there are characters that the story designates as good and characters which the story designates as bad. And for some reason, he can tell who is a good character and who is a bad character. But he should have identified this grandma as an evil character from the start. He's on a very particular mission to get these red flowers and destroy them. And then he doesn't take the key from the person who has the key and instead obeys them and collects dogs. And it's the stupidest thing I've ever had to encounter in a video game in my entire life. Kill the grandma, get the key, destroy the flowers, everything's solved. Why am I collecting dogs, James? Why
because dogs are cute.
am I collecting dogs,
you like dogs
one
right?
by one in the desert when I can just kill the grandma and get the key? She is evil. She's actively obstructing my ability to destroy the flowers. We do lots of stuff to people who are obstructing us otherwise, but for some reason, we allow her to obstruct us, even when she tells us she's not going to give us the key anyway. Doesn't make any sense. I hate Quote so much.
It sounds more like you hate the game.
I enjoy Cave Story, but this one thing really annoyed me, and I think it's basically because of his character. You kind of just go along with whoever tells you to do whatever, and instead of doing the logical thing. I also wanted to give a shout out to the worst acted character, which is the knockoff Jim Carrey from Bad Mojo, which is hilarious. I love it so much. But he's so cheesy.
He's great though, right? It's not.
Yeah, he's great because he's bad.
That's true. I guess the characters in like Typing of the Dead are also kind of like under that category.
Yeah, but for me, it's definitely Quote from Cave Story. Definitely the worst main character. I was also going to say it's not a main character, but I think Jack Black as a character is so funny, and it's all because of that quote he says at the end. I will never forget that where at the end he says, "It wasn't airplanes, but it was Beauty who killed the beast." I'm like, you literally kidnapped the monkey and put it in chains. You are the one who is directly responsible for everything, but you're waxing poetically saying Beauty killed the beast. It's so good.
But yeah, it mostly comes down to like self-insert characters who don't like Quote don't actually allow you to make decisions, who are in fact not self-insert characters, are just underwritten for no good reason. That's the kind of character I hate the most. If I have full decision-making control, then great, sure. But, either give me a character who has a well-defined personality or let me do everything myself. And
Yeah, I mean,
roleplay.
you can. There's a lot of like characters in like military shooters in the 2000s who are kind of like blank, brown-haired military white guy. I think they can kind of fall into this category, but they're self-inserts to some degree because a lot of the people playing them were white males with brown hair because they were all boring like that. But yeah, they're uninspired, boring characters. But yeah, there's something that ticks me off particularly about Quote for some reason.
What about the opposite opinion? Who are some of the best? I know we've already answered a lot of questions, but I want to give us our own question.
Wow, that's a good question. Do you have something in mind while I think about it?
I,
Can't put me on the spot like this, James. It's a podcast.
all
This isn't
right.
live radio.
I gotta come up. Okay, The Bachelor, from Pathologic is a great character.
Okay, yeah, that is a great answer. Yeah.
What about
What about Max Payne? Max Payne's a great
Max
character.
Payne is a great character, yeah, with some great quotes. I actually quote him regularly despite being like less high on the game than Pat was. The Lost Viking. No, not the Lost Vikings.
I'm also scrolling through our episode page.
Vagrant Story, there's some good characters like Sydney. I liked him a lot.
Kate Archer from No One Lives Forever.
Oh, great character, yep.
Yeah.
Excellent. Freelancer, I almost picked as like less good character. I really didn't vibe with Trent too much. Although I rewatched a bunch of the cutscenes before we recorded and was like, it's actually not as bad as I said during the episode. So
Maddie from Celeste, quite good character.
Yep, great character. I liked a bunch of the characters in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines were entertaining. It was mostly the animation work that got it for me.
Which is shockingly good to this day.
Yeah, really good.
Yep, that's it. That is the full list of every good character from video game history. Thanks for listening, guys.
I liked a few of the characters from Path of Radiance. I wouldn't say they were great, but they
had a racist. That guy was great.
They had some edges to them. They were interesting.
That was funny.
Riddick, also known as Vin Diesel.
I'm still just disappointed that Path of Radiance didn't push that whole race angle stronger for the conclusion. It kind of like fell back and played a secondary role. It's a bit of a mistake, I think.
I really want to play Radiant Dawn because I hear it's really interesting.
That's the sequel, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I have heard it's better. Like you have more split up groups.
Yeah, and apparently, that sounds quite cool to me. So one day, and then right.
But we can't. If we're picking another Fire Emblem game, we can't do that one, right? Wouldn't we do one of the 2D ones?
That's a good point. I would love to pick one of the Game Boy ones or like one of the super old ones.
As long as I can speed it up, that's all I care about.
That is a fair opinion, yeah. Alrighty, well, the Slug Cat from Rainworld, great character.
Definitely has a personality, I think, in the way it's animated and everything. That does it, I think, James. Jesus Christ, it's been a long time.
2 hours and 58 minutes by my clock.
You're not allowed to say that, James. You have to edit the episode. The time's going to change.
That's true, and I'll have to add like a couple minutes of music, and then the intro music, and the outro music doesn't count.
Exactly 3 hours.
Damn.
Can I just say thank you to everyone for listening to us so far? Thank you for your patience. I know it's been a long time since our last episode, and we are keen to get back in on it. We love doing the show. We love having you listen, and it is our pleasure to record for you. So thank you all for listening, and we will see you again soon for a more substantive episode on a video game.
Yeah. And I am still, to this day, every time someone joins Discord and they say things like, I listen to you guys on my lunch break, I'm always in a bit of disbelief to this day. It's very odd to hear that, but I'm very
humbling,
grateful. Yeah, thank you. So until next time, we'll see you later.
Bye, everyone.